What is your favorite game from your childhood? That's a question that everyone gets asked all the time, and depending on what your childhood was like, you may have one or many games that you grew up loving in a special way for one reason or another. I'm very much in the latter category, and was very lucky to have a myriad of games that I vividly remember loving while I was a kid, like Mario Galaxy 2, Skylanders, PvZ Garden Warfare 1 and 2, and more. One thing I feel is seldom asked is why those games from our childhood stick out to us so much, to the point that those experiences can give us a rose-tinted view of games that otherwise aren't very good. Most of the time it's chalked up to nostalgia, which Google defines as a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. Nostalgia is often given a negative connotation in modern times, due to its ability to cloud your judgment, among other things. Nostalgia and its effects on people is a whole topic of its own, which I will be touching on later, but if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, we find that nostalgia is just one of the effects of video games as a form of art. Video games as art has been a hotly debated topic for many years now. Most of its detractors will say that games are too simplistic and childish, or that they don't try to say or express enough to be artistic. There's actually a Wikipedia article on this topic, and while it doesn't give the insight that you would gather by participating in video game discussion for some time, it does offer some accounts by industry professionals. There's one by Hideo Kojima that I think is very interesting. Video games aren't trying to capture one person. A video game should make sure that all 100 people that play the game should enjoy that service provided by that video game. It's something of a service. It's not art. But I guess the way of providing service with that video game is an artistic style, a form of art. One of the main points of contention here is whether video games should or should not be considered art if they sacrifice specific appeal for broad appeal. This is a valid point to make, but I think that the fault in Kojima's statement is that he overgeneralizes the entire video game industry. Now, this statement was made in 2006. The video game sphere has changed drastically in the past 2 decades, and there's a good chance that Kojima's views on this topic have changed as well, especially considering how he implies that they may be art depending on how you look at it. Now, you can call me lazy all you want for reading Wikipedia sources and calling it a day. Trust me, I know, and I'm going to do it again later, but all of this raises some questions. Do games stop being art when reaching for wide appeal like Kojima suggested? Does this mean that games with specific intent are art? Does the intent of appeal even matter? Are all video games art simply because they are video games? Well, this is what I've decided to ramble about for the next 3 hours. Go grab some popcorn and get comfy, because through the course of this video, I will cover 5.5 games in which I consider myself to have had a profound personal experience in some way. Each of these games are viewed very differently in the public sphere, and I would like to bring to light just how games can be viewed as art, and how it relates to the overall way in which you experience video games, starting with a game that has seen a vast amount of praise, Superliminal. Superliminal is a 2019 indie puzzle game by Pillow Castle Games where the player undergoes dream therapy through a series of 9 levels, which involves perspective and optical illusion-based puzzles. It's a game that has received glowing reviews across the board by players and very respectable reviews by critics. Even if this is a minor difference, this is going to be the first in a long-running series of examples of players disagreeing with the critics. Needless to say, I absolutely love this game. In my long-running Twitter thread where I review games that I've played, I reviewed Superliminal on December 26, 2022. The review reads, Superliminal. I played this game earlier this year on Xbox Game Pass because I had a free Discord Nitro code for it. It ended up becoming a top 10 game of all time for me. There's just something so special about this wonderful little puzzle game. I was so sad when my Game Pass code ran out and I couldn't play it anymore, so I bought it again on Steam and replayed it. It's not a perfect game by any means, but between its stylized visuals, fun and inventive gameplay, stellar and varied music, and good and thought-provoking message, this game is a real masterpiece, even despite its short length. Unfortunately, this entry was written before I really started going into detail on my thoughts for games, so to make up for it, I will now spend the next 20 minutes detailing my thoughts on this game. Upon starting Superliminal, you're greeted with a commercial for Somnosculpt Dream Therapy, which is advertised to be able to help with self-esteem issues. The game doesn't waste time, and immediately throws you into gameplay right after. While I don't think that this is the greatest opening in the world, I can still appreciate what it does. The entire game strikes a good balance of dealing with serious topics like mental health with an overt cheesiness that doesn't feel like it's underselling the gravity of the subject matter, while also not feeling overly self-important. Superliminal's writer, Will O'Neill, explains this further in the developer commentary mode of the game.
So, when I wrote the opening line of, "Are you filled with feelings of self-doubt?" at the beginning of the game, I was definitely envisioning a player immediately, unconsciously responding with yes. And of course, the purpose of that is to sort of pull you into the idea that you're not playing a character in the game, that it's you inside this experience. And of course, making it clear that the clinic itself is not necessarily the safest or most prestigious place to get treated creates an immediate tension, especially when the very first thing you do in the game is accidentally sign away all of your rights.
It quickly becomes clear that you are definitely not in the facility and have already entered the dream state because of your newfound ability to resize objects, and you then enter the first puzzle room of the game. This is also your first encounter with the game's incredible music. The soundtrack contains a lot of ambient piano pieces, which contribute to the ethereal, dream-like experience. Another music-related praise I have for Superliminal is its transitioning of the music between areas, specifically between the standard areas of levels and these backrooms-like in-between areas, a few of which are already present in this level. This game's art direction is also incredible, with each level containing a fantastic and unique theming, with this introductory level being a 90s rendition of a low-budget sketchy facility, as described by Steve Allen, Superliminal's art director, in the dev commentary mode.
One of our main visual touchstones for this section centers around a couple of silly questions. What would someone in the early 90s dream up as a futuristic testing facility? And how could they build that on a shoestring budget but with infinite time?
Warning.
I feel like those two questions were ones we actually asked ourselves more than once during the process of making this game.
An example of this is the broken window puzzle, where you have to resize this cube to fit into a hole that's far away. A window is crudely shattered, with the broken glass still remaining on the floor. Small details like these create the slight eeriness that you're likely familiar with from strange dreams that you've had. Superliminal, as a whole, does a perfect job of recreating the feeling of being inside of a dream. Now, I have absolutely zero experience with lucid dreaming, but I asked around, and someone in a Discord I'm in told me how Superliminal compares to real lucid dreaming. Pretty similar, actually. When I lucid dream, I have two, quote, variants that I can't control which I get. The first one holds things within my grasp, and I can change things as I please. These ones are a lot more anchored and grounded, and I have more control. The second one is more esoteric, where I am fully lucid, but I can't control anything, and I'm stuck along the ride of it. These ones are hyper-chaotic and will change backgrounds, people, things, places, dialogue, outcomes, and objectives all randomly at any time. Making it through those ones can be a huge burden mentally, and I wake up exhausted. Superliminal, I'd say, falls into the first type of lucid dreaming I have, because I can change the objects around, and the setting and backgrounds are consistent, if not a bit random. Take their word for it, because they know a lot more about it than I do. To go back to the game itself, after a few more basic introductory puzzles, you fall down a hole and into a bed, where it seems like you've finally woken up. It's all a trick though, as you stumble into a warm and welcoming environment that clashes with the standard and somewhat bland look of the fake office space. An intentional choice, as stated by Superliminal's game director, Albert Shih.
We want the first moment of people walking into this hallway to feel different from other first-person puzzle games. This hallway is designed to feel surprisingly warm, which helps make it feel a little bit surreal, and a little bit odd. Throughout the game, we're bouncing between these two feelings, the feelings of warmth and coldness.
Dr. Glenn Pierce, the person monitoring your progress through these dream sections, chimes in every now and then via radios placed throughout the levels. His smooth and unconcerned voice adds to the otherworldly experience present in these levels, still accented by Matt Christensen's amazing ambient jazz compositions. The visual contrast of these comfortable hotel hallways from the deserted, cold between spaces is immaculate, and contributes to the overarching level theming of an imperfect reality. As much as I've been praising the visual and auditory elements of the game, I want to make sure I'm not neglecting the actual gameplay either. All of the puzzles in the game are inventive and unique, and make the most of the gimmicks present in each level. I really like this moon puzzle at the end of level 2. This room presents you with just about nothing, and requires you to think outside of the box, quite literally. You have to grab the moon straight out of the sky and take the exit elevator from it. In level 3, you once again wake up in your bed, and make your way through the lobby again. You're met with a long, dimly lit hallway, which leads to a liminal, museum-like space filled with puzzles surrounding dice. This level is one of the frontrunners in how Superliminal plays with perspective, in every meaning of that word. In this level, the game challenges your perspective in the sense that it challenges your preconceived notion of what an object or idea should be, by using the various interpretations of a die to show you that not everything is as it seems. I'll come back around in the end and connect this idea to the rest of the game as well, so sit tight. I really like how your interpretation of these backroom spaces changes from this point onward too. This game technically has a plot, but I wouldn't say that it's super important. After entering dream therapy, Dr. Glenn Pierce tries to wake you up, but instead, you end up falling into dreams within dreams. The trick with the office space is designed to not only be a starting point for levels, but also as a device that makes you feel trapped inside your own dreams. Because of this, these areas now add a slight unsettling feeling to the levels, as they give the idea that these false dreams are imperfect creations of the mind rather than a simple employees-only area like in level 1. Level 4 is a sort of spoof on a horror level, caked in the superliminal goofiness that permeates throughout the whole game. This level strikes a perfect balance of being mildly unsettling, but still incredibly comedic. The ambience is perfect, and adds to the feeling of isolation in the level as well. The incredible darkness, combined with the fact that Dr. Glenn Pierce rarely chimes in during this level, makes for an impeccable atmosphere that isn't overtly creepy to the point where I'm shitting my pants, but doesn't outright fail at being off-putting. It's hard to really put the genius of this level into words, so I implore you to play it for yourself. Actually, you should go play the whole thing for yourself right now. It's the best $20 you'll ever spend, and it frequently goes on sale for half that price. Level 5 brings back the cozy liminal aesthetic of levels 2 and 3, this time with the gimmick of cloning objects rather than resizing them. This mechanic is a huge refresher. At this point, you've been doing resizing puzzles for 4 levels. Thematically, this level uses objects you're familiar with at this point, like the door and the alarm clock, to change your perspective once again. Level 5 also has the puzzle that confused me for the longest time on my first playthrough, which is this one with the giant apple and the fan. You're supposed to get an apple to stay on this button which opens the door, but the fan will blow away any clones that you make. After much more time than I'd like to admit, I finally caved in and looked up the solution, which was just to go up and clone the apple right onto the button. Level 6 begins with my favorite isolated moment in the game, the relaxation room. So much so that I made it my Steam profile background. It's not going to be obvious why exactly I like it, but it will later once I begin to analyze this game's themes in depth. For now, the aptly named Dollhouse level contains a lot of puzzles about rooms resizing around the player, rather than the player resizing the objects. An example of this is the bounce house puzzle, where you enter a bounce house which leads to a vent inside of the room where the bounce house is located. From there, you grab the bounce house you just entered, bring it into the vent to make it smaller, place it on the upper ledge, and then exit the bounce house. I really don't think it can be overstated how trippy and innovative this game's puzzles are. One final thing before moving on is that this was the first level in which I found one of the star rooms. It was super cool, and one of the first times I felt such a sense of wonder from finding a secret in a video game in quite some time. You can imagine my surprise when I found out that there's one in every level in the game from 2 to 7. It's insane how far above and beyond Superliminal goes with its secrets, having astronomically more than you'd expect for a game that takes 2 hours if you're taking things slow. Apart from the 6 hidden star rooms, there's also an entire chessboard's worth of blue and red chess pieces hidden in the levels that unlock a secret room, blueprints that unlock more secrets, and even level-specific ones, like the secret area in level 2, a secret ending in level 4, and the secret bar area in level 8. This game really rewards you for venturing off the beaten path. Moving on, level 7 acts as a shift in the game's focus. You're no longer meandering through rooms and rooms of optical puzzles, but instead, you're finally trying to break out. You stop methodically trying to figure out things and start running through a fast-paced level, with the music shifting in tone accordingly. But as said by Matt Christensen, the piano is still there to guide you. After quickly making your way through the rooms, each model after a previous level, the music cuts, and you're taken to an empty area with infinitely repeating street lamps. When you try to approach them, they suddenly turn into walls, and once you do that to all 4 sides, a structure appears with an alarm clock. I think this level is a perfect tonal shift without feeling too jarring. The level has a lot less substance by design, but I don't consider it to be a huge knock against it. As much as I like the otherworldly feel of the previous levels, bringing it back to a more grounded state for the beginning of the finale ultimately works to its benefit. Level 8 begins in a nondescript room with no clear objective. Eventually, you'll figure out that you can grab and resize this small model building. When you walk inside, you'll see that you're in the exact same room, which may give you the idea to pull the building through the portal, just to see what happens.
Please paradox from creating any refrains. Explosive dream overload may result. Please paradox overload. Please overload for dream explosion. S can illusion dream overcall frame.
Level 8 is an almost heaven-like ethereal landscape, complete by an angelic choir and Dr. Glenn Pierce's suddenly serious and profound tone, contrasting with his lighthearted silliness throughout most of the game. There's no more perspective here. Everything is flat, black and white.
You're well beyond dreaming now, and further out than anyone has ever come back from. But we hope that you won't get discouraged. After all, if this is a place of pure perspective, isn't it also a place where a different point of view could make anything possible? Isn't that why you came here?
This last section was something that Logan and I worked together on for a really long time. When I first saw it, I had this great feeling for how it could be like a really nice, impactful moment. And so I got this really kind of awe-inspiring, inspirational music to put behind it. And Logan absolutely hated it. I stuck to my guns and asked him to stick with it for a while and play it for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and see how things went. And he ended up totally coming around to my side of thinking. Initially, we were unsure if we went for this kind of pure feeling that it would just be really hokey. And I ended up reading this essay on television written by David Foster Wallace. And it really kind of encouraged me to kind of get over that sort of postmodern, too cool for anything aesthetic, and to just really go gung-ho into sort of rewarding you for ending the game by giving you something really nice.
This level was created early on. I liked the idea of giving the player some time to think about their journey rather than ending the game immediately, and I knew film-like cuts would be perfect for revisiting their experience through the game. Chris initially suggested a song for reference, and at first I hated it. I kept listening to it though, and eventually grew to love the song. Matt came up with a track that is even better than the reference material, and it fit perfectly.
Even though it meant facing obstacles that seemed impossible at first, you thought outside the box, and you overcame them. Because you saw things from every angle, you understood them for what they really were. Because you kept moving forward, no matter how far off the path you were told you were headed, or how unexpected it became, you found your way. In a few minutes, you'll be back in the real world, and some part of you will say that none of this was real. So how could it have really meant anything? But just like the power of perspective itself, it will have been as real as you believed it to be. All you've got to do is wake up.
And that's Superliminal. As much of a tangent as this may seem, I'd like to quickly piece together the themes of the game and bring this all around to the bigger picture of this video. As I stated earlier, Superliminal plays with the idea of perspective in every sense of the word. Levels 1 and 2 play with literal, physical perspective, how the objects in the level are in relation to you. Level 3, like I said, deals with perspective as in your notion of what a thing should be, by giving different interpretations of what a die can be rather than just a simple cube. Level 4 covers your perspective as in how you view the events around you. All the events in the level, like the red paint on the floor and the chess piece in the window, are just ordinary things. But because of the way things are presented, your perspective is that they are blood or someone staring at you. Level 5 has a more meta take on perspective, by literally changing the behavior of the objects you've been using for the whole game up to this point. Level 6 is similar to Level 4, in the sense that it involves how you react to changes in the world around you. But while Level 4 is about perceived events, Level 6 is about actual events, done by playing with the resizing of yourself in the level. Level 7, being the turning point in the game, represents the challenging of your own perspective, Level 8, the changing of your perspective, and Level 9, the acceptance of a new perspective. Of course, this is only my interpretation of what Superliminal is aiming for, but interpretation is the name of the game. Your interpretation of Superliminal's gameplay and messages is, like in any art, just as important as the material itself. Superliminal is, at the end of the day, a game about mental health. It's unique in how it is simultaneously very blatant and very abstract about its themes. It's very on the nose when it comes to the opening cutscene about self-esteem, as well as the ending cutscene where Dr. Glenn Pierce waxes poetically about what an unforgettable and life-changing experience you've had. If you only look at the surface like that, it definitely seems like the mental health themes are underdeveloped. But if you keep in mind that, as I outlined, the entirety of Superliminal has been about perspective, both in a figurative and literal sense, it all comes together. The game challenging your perspective for so long has been influencing you to challenge your own perspective about whatever may be troubling you in life. The game pushes you to look in that direction, but never outright says it until the very end. And that's why I think this game is so genius. It's beautiful in its subtlety, and in how open-ended the message is. Life can throw many things your way, and instead of saying that all your life's troubles will magically fade away, Superliminal offers an alternative. Whether you're struggling to begin a new journey in life, or to close the book on another, rethinking your perspective can make all the difference. Superliminal came to me during a time when I really needed it. Remember the Twitter thread I brought up where I reviewed games? The date of December 26, 2022 is important. I was going through a very tough spot in life at that time. There was a lot going on, and Superliminal made me rethink the way I looked at those issues. Even since, when I faced various uncertainties in my life, Superliminal has helped reshape how I process them. I would go as far as to say that Superliminal has changed my life for the better. I couldn't even think about giving it anything below a 10 out of 10 for that alone. On my most recent playthrough, which I did for this video, I made the decision to play the game with all voices and subtitles off. It was amazing. It felt like playing the game for the first time again. The experience was completely different. Dr. Glenn Pierce's silly yet calming voice was no longer there to guide me. I was completely on my own. I said earlier I have no experience with lucid dreaming, but I feel like this is the closest I'll ever get. It felt like I was in the game, dreaming. All of the emotions this game made me feel were exacerbated, and that was no more true than when I got to the relaxation room. When I got there, I just sat and stared for over 5 minutes. The mesmerizing video of the clouds, the beautiful music piece by Matt Christensen, the magnificent lighting, everything about the room entranced me. Dr. Glenn Pierce's voice can be heard, even with voices off, saying one thing on repeat. Years ago, I had a dream. Not only is this a nice bit of foreshadowing for the final level, but it also resonated with me immensely. I think it should be studied how a game can bash a theme into your head so subtly like this. The game is constantly bombarding you with its message about changing perspective, but in the sneakiest way possible. By challenging your perspective constantly with its puzzles and themes, it coerces you to challenge your own mental perspective. It's crazy to think that using a piece of cheese as a ramp equates to positively changing my thoughts and attitudes, but I guess to become superliminal, you have to start out subliminal. I know that when you love a game as much as I love Superliminal, it can really sting to see people completely miss the point and dislike it as a result. One of the most common criticisms Superliminal receives is that it's too short and doesn't flesh out its unique gameplay mechanics well enough. And to a point, I agree. I do wish that there could have been some kind of side mode that solely focuses on challenging puzzles. The challenge mode that's already in the game is just the game again with some restrictions slapped onto it. Superliminal had a novel new gimmick and under-delivered in getting the most that it could out of it. I, however, don't think that the game itself needed to be longer. It perfectly wraps up its narrative without feeling drawn out or stale. Had it gone on any longer, I fear it may have started to drag. If this kind of dream therapy were a real thing, I do think that it would take around 1 to 2 hours. At the end of the day, I do still think that not liking the length of the game is a valid opinion here. Unfortunately, game reviewers do not have valid opinions. Taking a look over at Metacritic reveals that Superliminal has a 74, which isn't great. I highly disagree with a lot of these reviews, but the one that infuriates me the most is the one by GameSpew, who gave it a 70. Superliminal is fun. It may not be challenging, and it might not have a deeper message behind it, but it's a hell of a ride, and on many levels it's a technical masterpiece. Actually, that description makes it sound like a Marvel film, so I guess that means I could recommend it to pretty much anyone, unless you're Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola. It might not have a deeper message behind it. Did we play the same game? It's an unfortunate truth that game reviewers don't actually review games. All they do is document the basic vibe of a game after playing it for 20 minutes for a paycheck. This leads to problems with games like Superliminal, where a lack of an emotional attachment leads to a soiled experience of the game. It's like getting therapy from a robot versus an actual human. Getting therapy from a robot won't be the same because this lack of an emotional connection makes it feel shallow and inauthentic. This same idea applies to Superliminal. You simply can't play this game for business like a game reviewer would. It's fundamentally altering the experience for the worst. So no, Gaming Trend, who gave Superliminal a 60, the only one doing any superficial exploration is you. But I digress. I know my thoughts on this game and experience with it aren't shared by everyone, and that's okay. I'm not gonna force anyone to like the game more just because I love it, but I do think that when it comes to popular and beloved games like this, personal experiences like mine can get lost under a sea of generic positivity. It doesn't matter if you have a special connection with the game, you're just another fanboy. I doubt many of you actively feel this way, but it's the unfortunate endpoint that is reached almost every time, and I don't think it should be that way. To really understand what I'm talking about, take a game or game series that is immensely popular, like Persona. Persona, especially in recent times, has become a huge series with many fans, and it definitely helps that the games are almost universally considered to be great. I definitely feel as though there's a growing social stigma around games like this. When a series like Persona becomes too popular and too beloved, it starts to turn some people away. My theory as to why this is goes back to Kojima's quote in the beginning: the eternal struggle between specific appeal and wide appeal. With recent shifts in the gaming industry, and gaming only becoming more and more popular, it seems like game developers are going more towards the wide appeal option. This is an obvious choice from a business standpoint. If you appeal to more gamers buy your product, and you get more money. This has the effect of greatly reducing the artistic value of a game, though. Casual gamers aren't necessarily going to care about this, but more hardcore gamers will be off-put, and will thus seek out less popular games that appeal towards them more. This phenomenon is by no means restricted to the gaming industry, but no matter what medium is in question, it has some very complicated effects. The growing amount of casual gamers has caused the stigma to arise around popular games, where they'll be labeled as not true art simply because casuals may enjoy them. Let's go back to Persona for a second. Persona's popularity has caused it to be seen by some as games for children. Its theming and messages are downplayed because of its popularity, which causes the game's overall reputations to suffer. This is, in part, due to some actual people who really shouldn't be voicing their opinions, but the only reason these kinds of people exist is because the Persona games are easily digestible for more casual gamers, while still having deep and profound messages. So, what's the takeaway from all this? I'd say for the casual gamers, don't be afraid to try and interact and understand your games more. You'll probably begin to appreciate them a lot more than you already do. And hardcore gamers, don't downplay games just because they might be accessible to casuals. They could be just as good as they say they are. So what does all of this have to do with Superliminal? I know that my experience, even if it only applies to me, still matters. Many people have experiences like mine, and I want to celebrate those experiences rather than dismissing them for being just another positive review of a widely loved game. Sometimes you really do resonate with a piece of art, and we should be open to discussing that. After all, isn't it a testament to the game's quality that it was able to make you feel that way in the first place? Superliminal is a fantastic piece on mental health and the barriers that can get in the way of self-healing. This is a topic that has been growing popular in indie gaming as our world becomes more and more accepting of discussions about mental health issues and trauma. I hope that I've been able to express how Superliminal goes about this with such grace and subtlety, to the point of pure genius. As much as I try to convey just how wonderful of an experience Superliminal is, it's impossible to truly understand it without playing it for yourself. I strongly recommend that you play it for yourself. Now, Superliminal, despite the somewhat poor reviews I mentioned, is still a beloved game, and while this next game is still mostly well received, it has divided its fanbase due to some questionable decisions regarding both its gameplay and story elements, to such a point where a decent amount of people even tell others to skip it if they're playing through the series for the first time. All this talking's got me a little thirsty though. Let me grab a dream soda real quick. I have a pretty short history with the Yakuza series, now known as Like a Dragon, but despite that, I have been obsessed with it. Since starting the series with Zero in March 2022, I have played every game in the series, including every numbered mainline entry, Gaiden, the original PS2 games, the Judgments, the Kurohyou games, Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, Dead Souls, Kinzen, and both versions of Ishin. I have dumped thousands of hours combined into all of these games, and I don't regret a second of it. But out of all of them, Yakuza 3 is the one that stands out to me the most. It's considered by many to be the weakest entry in the franchise, due to its seemingly bugged combat in which enemies are way too defensive and block most of your attacks, and for some story beats, which we will get to shortly. As for the combat, I'm somewhere in the middle of the conversation. Some of Yakuza 3's staunch defenders will say that the blocking is just a skill issue and that you should just grab and stop mashing, while the haters say that it ruins the game and is impossible to deal with. For me, I think that the defenders undersell how the blocking changes the way you play the game, mostly negatively, but I also think that the haters are neglecting the numerous workarounds that exist. Overall, I like Yakuza 3's combat, but understand that it's much better on New Game Plus because you have more tools to deal with the blocking. While Yakuza 3 is very short in comparison to the other games in the franchise, it's still much longer than Superliminal, so be prepared for this section to be a lot longer. With that said, let me begin the story analysis at Chapter 1. Yakuza 3's introductory cutscene is interesting, because, unlike the previous two entries, it takes place in the middle of the game. Yakuza 1 starts with Kiryu and Shinji making their way to Peace Finance for a collection, and Yakuza 2 shows the Jingwon Massacre, an event which takes place over 20 years before the game's main story. Yakuza 1 starts in the present, Yakuza 2 in the past, and now Yakuza 3 in the future. Just something I thought was neat. Anyhow, this cutscene introduces us to Kiryu's orphans, which hadn't existed prior to this game, and some of the new characters, like Rikiya and the for now unnamed boss. This boss, as Rikiya tells Kiryu, has been shot. The scene then cuts to Daigo Dojima, the chairman of the Tojo clan, the Yakuza syndicate which Kiryu used to be in and was even briefly the chairman for himself. I realize that I've put myself in a bit of a sticky situation by bringing up the third entry in a series in a video that is otherwise about completely unrelated games, so I will have to spend a great amount of time explaining overarching details about the series, as well as connections to previous games that anyone who's playing the series in order would know by the time they got to Yakuza 3. This is a compromise I'm willing to make to be able to cover this game in this video, but I understand that this may be a little jarring for series vets who know this info already. I'll try to keep the explanations as concise and to the point as possible, so I can focus on the analysis of the game as much as I can. With that said, starting the game by seeing Daigo as chairman is a great move, as it opens the door for many possibilities with his newfound leadership. I really like the direction they settle on too, as when Daigo returns to Tojo HQ for a meeting concerning a deal in Okinawa, he's met by someone who looks exactly like Shintaro Kazuma, Kiryu's dead adoptive father, who was also captain of the Tojo for a short time. This Kazuma lookalike doesn't spend much time with greetings and gets straight to business. He somehow got his hands on the deed to Kiryu's orphanage, which Daigo has been very vocal about not touching. The lookalike stresses that the Tojo cannot refuse whatever deal is associated with the land, but Daigo stands his ground. In response, the lookalike reaches into his breast pocket. Daigo hurriedly reaches for his own gun, and... Flashing over to Kiryu and his gang in the hospital, the little girl by the name of Saki shows him a drawing of the man who shot the boss, now said to be named Nakahara. Kiryu is taken aback as this drawing depicts the exact same Kazuma lookalike that shot Daigo. I don't normally like spending long stretches just summarizing stuff that happens, but I wanted to emphasize just how strong of an opening this is. It sets up the conflict of the Okinawa land deal, and the mystery intertwined with it of how a dead man suddenly shows back up years later. It seamlessly introduces the updated situations of the characters, with Daigo's tenure as chairman now being in full swing, and Kiryu now owning an orphanage. It leaves you wondering just who these new people in Kiryu's life are and what happened to Daigo after getting shot. It's a great intro to a great game. Chapter 1 proper begins in the cemetery 1 month after the events of Yakuza 2. The game uses this as a clever way to refresh your memory of the events and characters from the previous 2 games. Kiryu says his goodbyes to Sayama, don't worry she's irrelevant to this game, and the rest of this segment basically serves as an epilogue to Yakuza 2. Several goodbyes and combat tutorials later, you meet up with Majima on the roof of the Millennium Tower. For those not in the know, Goro Majima is a recurring character in the Yakuza series and longtime friend of Kiryu's. He plays a large role in almost every game, and was even a playable protagonist in Zero, and Dead Souls if you know you know. The main reason for their meetup is for Kiryu to ask Majima to look after Daigo while he's in Okinawa. This scene is the first of many examples of this game's main theme. The overall theme of the Yakuza series is how, even in the worst of places, you can still find humanity. It does this by utilizing the Yakuza, a real collection of organized crime outfits. While the Yakuza are certainly an evil group, both in real life and in the games, the Yakuza series shows that even amongst such a despicable organization, there are still genuinely good people to be found. Each entry in the series uses different avenues to explore this topic. For example, Yakuza 5 rather infamously uses the idea of dreams to propagate this theme. It shows how dreams contribute to one's legacy, and how you can still find meaning in your life even if you aren't able to achieve your dream. Conversely, it also shows how chasing a dream too hard can hurt you and those you care about, and how it can warp into an endless quest for power. The main idea of Yakuza 3 is challenging the definition of family, and more specifically, the definition of fatherhood. This one scene with Majima is a very mild example of Kiryu and Daigo's unconventional father-son relationship. This relationship in particular is only slightly touched upon in Yakuza 3, as it's a series-spanning one that develops from Yakuza 2 all the way to Yakuza 6, with some retroactive context in Zero, and some further tidbits in Yakuza 7, Gaiden, as well as most likely in Yakuza 8, which is not out yet as of the time of me writing this script. Aside from all of that, Majima is the first boss fight in the game. Yakuza 3 really innovates by having you start the game with a rooftop shirtless beatdown instead of just ending with it. This fight isn't all that special though, it's a watered down version of the Majima fight later in the game, and that one's way better. It's still a really solid first fight though. The blocking problem this game has doesn't really apply to bosses, which is a huge plus. I think this game has overall fantastic boss design, which is something I feel is overlooked when talking about Yakuza 3. I won't be talking about it here as Majima's first fight isn't a super great example, but for the other bosses, I will be stating my thoughts on how they are designed. For some closing thoughts on this chapter, I do like that we get a cutscene of just Kiryu and Majima chilling for once. Rarely do we ever get to see them hang out as friends, so props to Yakuza 3 for that. The PS3 trilogy of Yakuza games tried to give Majima a lot more depth to his character, and I think they succeeded. I'm not huge on how he was basically reduced to a plot device in Yakuza 5, and while that's also true to a far lesser extent in 4, he had a lot more plot relevance because of the Ueno Seiwa massacre. I think Yakuza 3 strikes a good balance of giving him a lot more to do in the story while also keeping the original spirit of his character alive. Chapter 2 fast forwards 6 months into the summer of 2007. We're back to Kiryu in his orphanage as he's about to sit down with his kids for dinner. One of the children, Izumi, is mysteriously absent from the table, so Kiryu goes to look for her. This is the first of many sections of the game which revolve around the kids in the orphanage. One of the biggest complaints that people have about this game is that the orphanage stuff takes up way too much of an already short game, and takes away from the actual Yakuza plotline, not to mention the segments generally being just plain boring. I do agree that the standard Yakuza-centered story could have used some extra runtime, especially considering the notoriously bad and drawn-out plot-dumping scene later in the game. But I don't think the orphanage stuff is the worst thing in the world. It definitely needed some of the fat trimmed off, and could have used some extra stuff to make it a little more interesting, but I don't consider it to be the spawn of Satan in the way that Yakuza 3's most vocal detractors make it out to be. Luckily, this first orphanage segment is very short and doesn't overstay its welcome, and it does a good job of laying out the groundwork for the game's themes of family. The most upfront way in which it does this is by affirming that Kiryu and the orphans are a family, and that it doesn't matter that these children lack their biological parents. For context, Izumi has confessed that she's being bullied by kids at her school for being an orphan. While this seems out of the ordinary to someone like me, who lives in the United States, as well as to those in other Western countries, children in the foster care system in Japan have it pretty rough and face large amounts of discrimination for their orphan status. The Yakuza series has always been known to be politically progressive when it comes to the treatment of marginalized groups, such as the homeless, sex workers, and now orphans. Even disregarding the political aspects, it's nice to see this game challenge traditional family structures in this way. In this regard, Yakuza 3 was ahead of its time. As time goes on, long-standing definitions of family are being put into question more and more, and this is not the first time that Yakuza 3 will give its 2 cents on that topic. The game does another time skip into March of 2008, where Haruka gives Kiryu an eviction notice, which is implied to be from the 2 men sitting in their truck out front. These are the 2 guys we saw accompanying Kiryu in the intro cutscene, and that messes with things a bit. We know that these 2 eventually come around to be Kiryu's friends, which takes away from the mysterious allure of the eviction notice. But at the same time, we also know that something must have happened to make them join the good side. There's still a mystery as to what their deal is, but in setting up another mystery, it takes away from the mysteriousness of this mystery. I am a good writer. The 2 guys drive away as Kiryu tries to confront them, so he needs to go track them down. He finds them eating popsicles in Ryukyu. They try to appear menacing, but fail miserably. The guy in the floral shirt says that for the exact reason why they're trying to evict Kiryu, he needs to go ask their boss. Kiryu, comedically, just walks away. The guy stops Kiryu and challenges him to a fight. As funny as this scene is, it's also an early example of Kiryu's past coming to haunt him. This is something that is more central to the plots of later games, but Yakuza 3 started that motif. Seen here by the Ryudo captain accusing him of being a Yakuza because of the tattoo on his back. As for the fight itself, it's okay. It's pretty easy on New Game Plus once you have Kamaki Parry unlocked and know the timing for the attack he does after this little shuffle. It's a pretty annoying fight on New Game though, but Rikiya, as we now know him, only has 1 health bar anyway. Rikiya, accepting defeat, agrees to take Kiryu to the Ryudo office. Kiryu sits down and waits for Nakahara, the Ryudo boss, and sees a little girl, who's drawing. Nakahara says that she's his adoptive daughter, and that her name is Saki. She'll be important later. Nakahara tells Kiryu that they're trying to evict him as part of a plan to build a resort on the property. Even with promises of money, Kiryu refuses to budge. Nakahara pulls a sword on Kiryu, but he manages to talk him down, asking him where his kids would go if he were to kill him. I like this scene because it shows you that the Ryudo are different from the other mindlessly evil Yakuza families that Kiryu has met in the past. It shows that Nakahara and his boy still have humanity in them, and the upcoming chapters build on that thought. Chapter 3 begins with a news report on the resort deal that Nakahara mentioned. At this point, you can probably connect the dots that the resort deal is the same one that Daigo refused to partake in. The report shows that the deal is actually a political struggle between 2 politicians, Yoshinobu Suzuki, who supports the resort deal, and Ryuzo Tamiya, who wishes to build an American military base instead. The game makes it a point to show Suzuki as this lovable man of the people, and Tamiya as a conceited, self-absorbed money grubber. After the news report is another orphanage section, this time with Shido. He's been getting bullied, but hasn't been able to say anything about it because the bully threatened to tell his dad, who has connections to city officials who can shut down Morning Glory, the name of the orphanage. This all serves as an elaborate excuse to introduce the golf minigame, where you play with that same city official that the bully's dad threatened to call. The official heads to Morning Glory, the bully and his dad show up to complain, the bully makes a fool of himself, and the whole situation gets resolved. This one's pretty inoffensive. The only thing it really does is shake up the gameplay a bit, and further shows the troubles of Japanese orphans, but it gives little insight into Kiryu and Chiro's relationship otherwise. Another one starts immediately after, and you're tasked with finding out what happened to Ayako's allowance. You round up everyone at the dinner table, but still aren't able to figure out what happened to it. On the way out, you find Eddie quickly running out of the room after doing something to Ayako's bag. Turns out, she put all the money back in there. And when you go to confront her on the beach, it turns out that she took the money because she promised that she'd go see a movie with her friends. This side story is similarly just fine. These short sidetracks, while combining to make something great, are largely uninteresting in isolation, which is why I think most people don't like them. I don't even blame them for this. Not everyone is obsessed with the bigger picture of my 2009 PS3 game about sweaty, half-naked men punching each other. But at the end of the day, I still like the inclusion of these side stories, even if I do wish they were handled a little better. At least with this second one, we get a really sweet cutscene at the end of it. Keep this line in mind for later. Rikiya shows back up and says that he needs a favor from Kiryu. He explains that Saki disappeared a few days ago, and they haven't been able to find her despite their tireless efforts. He says that they can't go to the police about it because Nakahara never officially adopted Saki. He took her in after running a collection on her dad. When he walked in, he was hanging, with Saki still clutching to his leg. Saki's biological mother, described as having a tendency to sleep around and having next to no care for her daughter, is reportedly trying to get her hands on her again. Rikiya says that Saki can't contact them due to her inability to speak, a psychological reaction to seeing her dad's suicide, which is also the reason why she communicates using the sketchbook. Kiryu goes to talk some sense into a now completely wasted Nakahara, who believes that Saki ran away to be with her mother instead of him. He puts himself down by saying that, as a Yakuza, he has no right to be a father. I know I'm plot rambling again, but trust me, I will come back around to this soon. Kiryu and Rikiya eventually find out that Saki is being held in the Tamashiro family office, an Okinawa-based branch of the Tojo. This starts off the first long battle of the game. For those unfamiliar with the Yakuza series, long battles are lengthy combat sections which involve you traversing through a large area. Essentially, they're like levels in other games. This one is alright. It's not blowing any minds, but it's fun. A solid B tier, I'd say. The real problem with Yakuza 3's long battles is the amount of them. Every other Yakuza game has 6 to 8 long battles. Yakuza 3 has 4. Now, that's not totally a bad thing as long as the long battles are of good quality, but starting out with a mere decent one isn't the greatest sign. One good thing I can say though is that Illtreatment, the long battle theme, is a banger. The long battle ends with Kiryu making his way into Tamashiro's office, where he finds Tamashiro himself, along with Saki and her mother. The situation quickly becomes clear, as Tamashiro says that Saki's mother kidnapped her due to their affair. Saki's mother exclaims that he promised they could be a family. This was, of course, all a lie so that Tamashiro could get leverage over the Ryudo family. This pisses Kiryu off, and he begins the fight with Tamashiro. Tamashiro is a two-phase boss. He starts out with a fast and defensive knife moveset, before going into heat mode and pulling out some knuckles. Phase 1 Tamashiro is very dodgy and loves to block. He's very much an exception to the bosses not blocking as much as normal enemies, but this is by design. He's very defensive in this phase, and you're intended to catch him when his guard's down. Tamashiro is the first boss in the game with a good wall-less corner that allows you to do some knockdown combos. This, of course, includes the infinite, but I won't be abusing that. This more so applies to his first phase though, as he gains knockdown immunity in his second phase. This is not to say that it's impossible, however. There are some weird workarounds, such as attacking as soon as you land a parry or pick him up off the ground. For some reason, enemies will immediately be sent into a knockdown state, although the window is very small, especially for picking an enemy up. This also happens when you break out of an enemy's grab, which has a much more generous window, but this doesn't apply for Tamashiro as he does not grab you. Tamashiro is a lot more aggressive in his second phase, but his attacks are also a lot slower, which allow for many more parry opportunities, or if you're crazy like me, tiger drops from behind. After beating Tamashiro, Rikiya and Nakahara bust in, and I'm not even gonna beat around the bush. This is my favorite scene in the entire game, and honestly in the entire series as well. I don't want to spoil the moment with my commentary, so have a look for yourself.
中原の親父さんな、お前がいなくなってすごく心配していたんだ。お前がな、本当の母親のとこに行っちゃったんじゃないかと思ってすごく寂しがっていたんだ。お前は中原と母親どっちと一緒にいたいんだ。
何が娘よ、何が母親よ。バッカじゃないのあんたたち。
何？
私はね、この子のせいで人生めちゃくちゃになったのよ。生まれた時からいっつも邪魔だった。
この浜、王将の前でなんてこと。
うるさい、私に触らないで。そんなにその子が欲しいんならあんたにくれてやるわ。
くそ、なんて母親だ。実の子の目の前で。これじゃあ先があんまりにも。
先なら大丈夫だ。スケッチブックの中身見たことないだろう。
ああ、
見てみろ。
いつも見守ってくれてありがとう。
もう答えは出ていたんだ。サキはあんたの本当の娘なんだ。そうだろ、サキ。
サキありがとうな、ありがとうな、サキ。
It's difficult to put the beauty of this scene and how much I resonate with it into words. It employs the classic filmmaking technique of showing rather than telling via someone physically unable to tell. I understand that I just implied that a cutscene in Yaoi Simulator 2009 is film, but I digress. I want to save my personal connections to this game as a whole for after the story analysis, but I can't help but explain the sheer artistry of this scene and how it makes me feel. I grew up with an abusive father, and I'm still dealing with the lasting effects of his abuse to this day. Even after I was finally able to leave his household, that part of my family still pressured me to keep in contact with him and pretend as if nothing happened. Now, I'm only 17 years old, so for essentially my whole life, I've been told that I have to love him as family even if my own heart told me otherwise. Even worse, I played this game when I was 15, right after I stopped living with him. Needless to say, I was conflicted and seriously doubted if it was right to want to cut him out of my life. Then, this scene comes along, looks me dead in the eyes, and somehow, without words, sternly tells me, blood relation is meaningless. You decide who you consider family. Now, I don't want to dwell on the heavy stuff for too long just yet, so I'd like to wrap back around to the previous section with Nakahara. He considered himself unfit to be Saki's father because he's a Yakuza, so this scene serves as a wake-up call for him just as much as it did for me. Kiryu even interrupts him during that conversation to tell him that he was an orphan under the care of a Yakuza. In all of the ways that this game explores family and fatherhood, this might be my favorite, although I am biased. Anyways, after the events that transpired that day, Nakahara begs Kiryu to swear an oath of brotherhood with him out of respect. Out of nowhere, Daigo comes in. Remember, this is before he got shot. He reveals that Minister Suzuki, the politician backing the resort deal, was working with the Tamashiro family to acquire land, and that the Tamashiro had abducted Sake to get their hands on the deed to Kiryu's land. The resort and the military base are more connected than we thought, apparently. Daigo assures Kiryu that despite all of this political messiness, he will try his best to make sure the orphanage is untouched. Toma is also here. He's a politician who works under Tamiya, the guy backing the military base. He doesn't have too much importance right now, but he'll pop back up later. I like the conclusion of this scene as it really shows the growing relationship between Kiryu and Daigo. Daigo has a very sincere and deep respect for Kiryu, and speaks with him in the way that a son would to his father. Like I said, the unorthodox familial bond of theirs isn't fully fleshed out in this game, but it's still nice to see regardless. I want to take a short break to warn you that chapters 4 to 9 are pretty light on the analysis. A lot of the strong theming and symbolism take a back seat while the plot does its thing during the middle section of the game. This is not to say that the middle part of the game is bad, but I have significantly less to talk about during this portion. When it comes to a review of the game like this, where I'm more so talking about why the game works for me, rather than how objectively good I think the game is, it's somewhat difficult to make good points during a segment where the game drops most of its messaging for more plot development. I'll still make time to talk about the things I do find important enough to cover, but those will be fewer and farther between. We finally come full circle in Chapter 4, where we start right after the intro cutscene ended in March 2009. Kashiwagi, the current leader of the Kazuma family, calls Kiryu to alert him of Daigo's shooting at the hands of the Kazuma lookalike. The doctor gives an update on Nakahara's condition, and we cut to Kiryu on the beach. He's planning to head to Kamurocho the next day to get to the bottom of things. Rikiya begs him to tag along, and Kiryu accepts. But before we get to Kamurocho, we have more orphanage side quests to do. Chapter 4 is where I feel like they really jump the shark and overstay their welcome. The first one is about the kids finding a dog. Izumi really wants to keep it because it reminds her of her old dog, so we have to go on a wild goose chase. First by literally chasing the dog around Ryukyu, then by going and buying some dog food, then going all the way back to Morning Glory for a ball, and finally fucking off and doing something else until the game says you can progress. The dog finally decides to listen and you go home. The end. This one's pretty bad and nothing more than a mindless fetch quest, but still pales in comparison to the steaming termite mound of shit that is the next one. Rikiya points your attention towards Mitsuo, who apparently has a crush on Ryona. She rejects his offer to go to the movies, and you have to go buy some clothes to improve his drip. He tries again and gets super rejected. Kiryu overhears Ryona talking to Haruka. She says she hates black people and gets rejected by her crush for being a burn victim. And then she and Mitsuo make up. This is a huge oversimplification, but one, I don't think that a child being racist is the greatest plot point in the world. Bit of an editor's note, I understand what they were going for here. They're making a connection between Ryona not liking Mitsuo because he's black, and her crush not liking her because of her burn scar. Still, I don't think this was handled in a great fashion. I don't think that equating racism to rich kids being stuck up is the best comparison. And two, these kids are supposed to be like brothers and sisters to each other. Ayako even says that to Eddie, so I don't think it's controversial to say that it's weird that these two kids with a brother-sister dynamic want to date each other. Both of these orphanage chores completely miss the point of the other segments. These parts have essentially nothing to say on the meaning of family, unless you count "it's okay to date your sister" as challenging the meaning of family. There's also a third orphanage story after this, which is both far more tolerable and far less interesting. It retraces the steps of the Shiro bullying story by showing that orphans are actually really nice and not mean evil little babies. Only difference is that this time you play baseball instead of golf. After like an hour of dicking around at the orphanage, some more stuff that really doesn't matter happens, and we finally head off to Kamurocho. I know it sounds like I'm skimming through this part, which I am, because this is the worst part of the game to me. Everything could be cut out and nothing would be lost. Luckily, it's all uphill from here, and the game never sinks to the same level again. Upon going to Kamurocho, we're greeted with a cutscene involving a very muscular Yakuza doing some training. He appears to be very important, having his own secretary and having to cancel a meeting with some businessmen to make it to the one for the Tojo. We're not given much information other than that, and his endorsement of Gatorade. Moving on, we have another guy intimidating the owner of a Chinese restaurant in some interesting ways. After the owner refuses to comply with his demands, he blows the whole place up. And for our final introduction, we go to what remains of the Nishikiyama family. The boss is very loudly doing something to a woman in the other room. His goons pick up the call, which alerts them of the meeting. The boss exits the room and generously rewards his underlings for their hard work. He very obnoxiously outlines his plans for war and gets on the phone with the guy we saw a second ago, named Mine. The war that Kanda, the boss, is talking about is a war of succession for the chairman seat. This last scene is actually kind of chilling to watch knowing what we do about Mine later in the game, but we'll get there when we get there. I think these are good introductions to the new heads of the Tojo. They definitely don't seem like the greatest heads of a Yakuza syndicate in the world, at least when it comes to Kanda and Hamazaki, the second guy, but it's understandable when you see the tough times that have befell the Tojo. Cutting back to Kiryu and Kamurocho, he witnesses some customers running out of Stardust and goes to investigate. Inside, Hasebe, the Nishiki family captain, is attempting to cut a deal with Kazuki and Yuya, the managers of the club. They, of course, refuse, and it starts a boss fight. Hasebe's fight is one of the most forgotten about ones in the game, and I think that's a shame. For one, I really like Hasebe's design. His blue jacket and gold shirt are a unique color combination that really pops. And he's the only character in the series to have cornrows, if my memory serves me right. It's a unique hairstyle that I think is underutilized in the series and in media in general. Hasebe's fight is the big fuck you group boss that happens in every game. You know the one. Shimano 2 in Yakuza 1, Terada/Daijin Kim in 2, Munakaza in 4, Final Kanai in 5, Koshimizu 2 in 6, etc., etc. Funnily enough, though, in the game with what many consider to be the worst combat, this one is the most tolerable, and honestly pretty fun. The fact that enemies aren't as aggressive in this game, plus the added help from Kazuki and Yuya, are definitely factors in why this is the case. The group itself isn't that large anyway. You have very few crowd control options in 3 compared to later games, but the defensive enemy AI allows them to be picked off one by one more easily, while the others are distracted by your teammates. Hasebe himself doesn't have the most interesting moveset in the world, at least not until he pulls a sword out of his ass. He does use a copied Kenzin moveset, but it's still a nice change of pace. His defense goes down drastically in this phase, so you can kinda just wail on him. This is the last time we ever see Hasebe, which is a shame. He had a lot of potential. It's sad how much Chapter 4 lost the momentum the game had in Chapters 1 to 3. It's not often that a game's low point is immediately after the beginning exposition, but once again, it picks up from here. Kazuki and Yuya give Kiryu some context on the Nishikiyama family's new rise to power in the city. This will come back up later when we get more information on Kanda, but it's sad to see just how much of a shell of its former self the family has become, with Kanda himself being symbolic of that downfall. Anyway, you're forced to take a very specific route through the city due to the police, which leads you to getting jumped in an alleyway from some men in black. This is a nice surprise boss fight, or at least it would be if the main guy wasn't so aggressive while you're trying to deal with the mooks. That aside, this guy is really fun to fight, and Hidenori Shoji lays down the heat as always with the track Soundstorm. If you have a good memory, you'll remember seeing this guy in the intro cutscene with the Kazuma lookalike. Makes you wonder what this guy's deal is, and serves as a good reward for people with a keen eye. Without saying a word, these guys get the hell out of dodge once you beat them up, which serves as a good way to keep the player wondering just what's up with them. Kiryu heads up to the Kazuma office for a visit with Kashiwagi. Here, the game gives us a cutscene showing the Tojo meeting, which is a good insight into the personalities of the big three that we were just introduced to. They discuss what to do moving forward due to the chairman's uncertain condition. Kashiwagi and Mine seem to be in agreement in appointing Kiryu as interim chairman, but Hamazaki and especially Kanda disagree. I want to bring up again how Kanda is symbolic of the downfall of the Nishikiyama family. For those unaware, the family was started by Kiryu's oath brother, Nishiki, while he was in prison during the events of Yakuza 1. We've seen this family slowly wilt away from then to now, and now seeing Kanda, this loud, bumbling sex offender as the leader, just goes to show that it needs to be put down. Hamazaki, seemingly egging Kanda on, brings up the potential issues with bringing Kiryu in as chairman, which only makes him more pissed. Majima, who's been there the whole time, leaves, seemingly uninterested in their little playground scuffle. Kiryu and Kashiwagi get to talking for a bit longer before the power cuts out, and we get a very infamous cutscene.
変だな。カムロ町の明かりはついてるみたいだ。
柏木さん。柏木さん。桐生。この男。
繋がってるやつを探し出せ。
繋がってる。
多分そいつは沖縄のリゾート開発の裏で利権を狙ってる。そいつは登場界に。
登場界内部の人間ですか？
そいつを探し出せ。いいな。
はい。柏木さん。柏木さん。
As much as I want to talk about this, I don't feel like I can get my full point across about how Kashiwagi's death was handled just yet. And trust me, we will get to that later as well. I never got this whole section where Kiryu has to avoid the police. Do they think he's the one who was in the helicopter? Even if he was, there's no way he would have any blood on him. It doesn't make any sense. Anyways, Kiryu runs into Date, and they go to New Serena. This part is an unfortunate side effect of this game's wonky balance between the Yakuza plotline and the orphanage stuff. Date essentially lays out all the background information you need to know for these three Tojo guys. Because the traditional Yakuza story has to share its runtime with the orphanage, there's basically no way there would have been enough time to discover most of this information naturally. Even with this info dump and the really bad one later, the game still has trouble getting everything it wants into the story. I've already stated how I think that the orphanage stories are a necessary part of the plot, although they could have been cut down, and for some, removed entirely. Even if this were the case, I still think that Yakuza 3 would have needed to be a longer game in general to fit everything. I'm not entirely sure what caused the game to come out in the state that it did. If we look at Yakuza 3 in relation to Ryuga Gotoku Kenzan, we can see that it came out just under a year later. Kenzan itself was a side game intended to get the dev team some experience with the PlayStation 3 before moving on to the next main installment, being Yakuza 3. Kenzan is, at least in my opinion, a technical marvel. Not only is this game stunning to look at, but it is so grandiose in scale compared to any other game in the series. By all accounts, Yakuza 3 is a smaller game than Kenzan, but it turned out a lot sloppier in execution. I know a year between two releases sounds very short, but RGG Studio has had short gaps between releases ever since the studio was made. The gap between Yakuza 1 and 2 was only a single year, and for a more recent example, the gap between Gaiden and Yakuza 8 is only 2 months. It may be because the studio was still in its infancy at the time, being less than 5 years old, but who knows? I'll be wondering how Yakuza 3 ended up the way it did until the day I die. To summarize this scene after that tangent, Kanda is a thug and a sex offender, Mine is a businessman who bribed Kanda to get into the Yakuza, and Hamazaki has ties to the Snake Flower Triad, a Chinese mafia group in Yakuza 1. One of these guys is a traitor to the clan who ordered the attack on Kashiwagi, and you're now tasked with finding out who. First on the checklist is Kanda, but before you get to that, Nikiya tells you he's in Kamurocho now, so you go find him. He's protecting a girl from some Yakuza grunts who boast that they're in the Nishiki family. You beat them down and get them to point you to Kanda, who's waiting in a love hotel. Nikiya pretends to be gay to get them in, and the two of them confront Kanda, which starts the second long battle of the game. This has to be one of my favorite long battles in the series. It's fairly light on the actual fighting, but the concept of listening in on rooms in a love hotel to find Kanda is hilarious and super fun. It's a super cool way to shake up the gameplay of a regular long battle and almost feels like a mini-game. It's a pretty short long battle, especially if you know what rooms Kanda is going to be in already, because yes, they are the same every time. After finding Kanda 3 times, he runs into the VIP section, and you have to follow him up there. The Kanda boss fight has always seemed to me more like a puzzle than a fight. Kanda is very defensive in his first phase and has knockdown immunity, so it's all about finding the right openings to attack. Some ways I like to do this are either by charging a Lotus Flare Fist first, which bypasses knockdown immunity, or by letting him grab me, and abusing grab-release knockdowns. Phase 2 is when Kanda rips this giant stone decoration out of the wall. Do you wait it out until he drops it? Do you do a heat action or bounding throw to get some extra damage? Or do you just stop all of that immediately and do this one specific heat action that skips it entirely? In between these, he might go and pick up a piece of furniture, which requires you to parry. This also acts as an opening and temporarily disables his knockdown immunity. Rinse and repeat a few times, get to the very sexy QTEs, and the fight's over. You figure out that Kanda's too stupid to have been the one that killed Kashiwagi, but he does spill the beans by saying that Hamazaki did it. But first we gotta go check and make sure Majima didn't betray us. You go and find him in Purgatory, an underground area in Kamurocho filled to the brim with places to fulfill any of your desires. You ask him about his involvement in the resort deal, but he refuses to budge. At least, he won't until you fight him. This is probably my favorite Majima fight in the series. The gimmick of this fight is that Majima won't attack you unless you're facing away from him. All of this circling around you're seeing me do has a purpose. If your reaction time's good enough, you can parry or dodge around for a combo. The arena is small and completely lined with walls, which allows for some of the best bounding combos you can do in the game. Overall, just a really fantastic fight. Chapter 8 sees everyone else shift the blame onto Hamazaki. The florist from the last 2 games comes back and gives you some info on the resort deal. But just before he can give some info on the Cosmo lookalike, an emergency erupts in Kamurocho. The Snake Flower Triad has marched on the city and taken Rikia hostage. Kiryu embarks on yet another long battle to go save him. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. This is an F-tier long battle. It's the worst in the game and one of the worst in the series. Imagine the final long battle of Yakuza 2, but infinitely worse. I swear these enemies block 5 times more than the regular ones. They all have annoying movesets, and you get ganged up on so hard. Whose idea was it to make a section with infinitely respawning enemies with a mini-boss that you have to get to half health? Halfway through, you get a mini-boss that blocks everything, then a chase segment, fight more bad enemies, then fight an even worse mini-boss. Just a fucking awful long battle. I don't know how I made it into the game. You find Rikia about to get executed, and you have to fight Lau Kalong, the leader of the Snake Flower Triad who was also in the first Yakuza game. Lau Kalong has a great boss theme, but is the second worst boss in the game. Like his underlings, he blocks absolutely everything, so there's very little you can do against him in his spear phase. Most people recommend doing your full light combo, and then quick-stepping around him when he does his retaliation attack. This means basically nothing though, as he gains full super armor, so attacking him from behind during this attack does nothing, and the window to stun him afterwards is practically non-existent. Alternatively, you can spam reverse SST in his direction and it'll hit eventually. It's not the most fun thing in the world, but it works. His unarmed phase is a lot more fair. His attacks are very fast, but it's a lot easier to circle around him. This is easily his best phase. Everything goes to shit again once he pulls out his claws. He gains knockdown immunity because he's in heat mode, and now you can't block his attacks. Have fun learning the Tiger Drop timings because that's about all you can do. Lau Kalong's henchmen are about to kill off Rikia when suddenly... the man of the hour comes in and saves the day, but we unfortunately don't get any more answers.
Beautiful eyes. Like I heard from my brother before.
As mean dawn as that line is in the community, I don't really know what the point of this was other than add to the lookalike's mystique. At the end of the day, it's nothing to get too riled up about, but it is kinda weird. Still funny though. Chapter 9, aptly named The Plot, is the final chapter where the game packs in plot development way too hard. Next chapter we can finally get back to the good stuff. For now though, we find ourselves back in the main Purgatory office, having saved Rikia. To everyone's surprise, Mine shows up. He presents the head of Kanda as atonement for letting him get out of hand. He also informs Kiryu that Hamazaki is out of the picture, likely having been captured in response to the failure of the Triad's march and quote-unquote death of Lau Kalong. Mine is a very interesting character with a lot of depth that I feel is overlooked by many. I'm gonna save a full character analysis on Mine for the end of the story analysis because of how much there is to unpack. Many of Yakuza 3's biggest detractors will say that Mine, while being a decent villain, pales in comparison to those who both preceded and succeeded him. I wholeheartedly disagree with this. Mine, to me, is one of the most human characters in the series, even despite the relatively short amount of screen time he gets. Kiryu sends Rikia back to Okinawa, and then receives a call from none other than Minister Ryuzo Tamiya, the politician backing the military base. Tamiya asks for a favor from Kiryu, and the two of them decide to meet in the Diet Building, with Date tagging along for good measure. If you're familiar with this game, then you know what time it is. The infamous 30-minute info dump that involves nothing but Kiryu sitting his ass down and talking. I've mentioned before how this game takes some liberties in how it presents its plot, as an unfortunate side effect of having to share the game's runtime with the orphanage like two 8-year-olds with an Xbox. This scene is simply the worst of that compromise. I don't think that a scene like this is bad on paper. It's very likely that a politician as involved in the events of Yakuza 3 like Tamiya would have some crucial information that few others do. Ideally though, this scene is only around 5 minutes. We would get told a few new things, and the rest of the chapter would play out like normal. The rest of the information we would have learned in the final scene we got would be presented in a more natural manner throughout the rest of the game. But of course, this isn't how things ended up in the final product. I know I've blamed the cause of this on the wonky allotment of the game time on the orphanage, and while the orphanage segments do feel overly bloated at points, both in terms of the actual content within them and how much the game focuses on them, it's also a factor of the game just not being long enough in general. I stated before that Yakuza 3 is one of the shortest games in the series, clocking in at 16.5 hours according to How Long to Beat. I'm fairly certain that my original playthrough was even shorter than this, around 14 hours. You definitely feel this short length when playing the game, as some of the chapters, like 1 and 7, can go by in 20 minutes even without skipping cutscenes. None of this is to excuse the hulking mess of plot vomit we have here, but I can at least understand what necessitated its existence in the first place. To run through everything we find out in this scene as briefly as I can, we learn the military expansion bill is all a ruse to draw out an illegal arms dealing group known as Black Monday, named after the real-life stock market crash in 1987 that they and their leader, Andre Richardson, were thought to have caused, at least in this game's universe. The BMD system that was touted as the main appeal of this military expansion does not exist. The Kazuma lookalike is Shintaro Kazuma's twin brother, Joji Kazuma. The reason Kiryu never knew about Joji is because he joined the police force. Back when this was happening, a cop having a brother in the Yakuza would be a death sentence for their career, so they cut essentially all ties with each other. Joji currently works for the CIA. He and Tamiya are good friends, and have been helping each other execute the plan to bring Black Monday to light. Toma, Tamiya's secretary, who we saw back in Chapter 3, left to join Suzuki's cause after finding out the truth of the military expansion bill. It turns out that Mine has actively been backing the resort deal, so Toma will likely tell him everything about the military expansion. This will, in turn, cause Joji to silence him. Tamiya wants us to prevent that from happening at all costs, and it was actually the CIA who ordered the attack on the Kazuma office that resulted in Kashiwagi's quote-unquote death. It was performed because he was trying to put a stop to the resort deal. Tamiya certainly is an interesting character. You expect him just to be a background politician who sits in his office and calls the shots, and in a way, he is that. But you get to actually see what he's all about from this scene. I mentioned how the overarching theme of this series is how good people can be found in the worst of places. Tamiya is a unique example of this because of how the Yakuza series treats the government. The series seldomly directly comments on the government as an institution, but instead alludes to it by examining various political figures throughout the games. Many people with some kind of political power in these games are depicted as corrupt, greedy, selfish, misanthropic, the whole 9 yards. Notable examples are Jingu from Yakuza 1, Munakata from Yakuza 4, Heizo Iwami from Yakuza 6, and Ryo Aoki from Yakuza 7. By painting political figures in this way, the government has consequently become a place in society that people look down upon. But the Yakuza series is aware of this. Tamiya says that he wants Kiryu to save Toma, even despite his defection, because he genuinely wants the best for his country, and doesn't want to see a promising young politician like Toma be snuffed out. Tamiya proves that even in such an evil institution, there can still be good people, just like in the Yakuza. To round out the end of this chapter, Suzuki's men surround the building, and Kiryu needs to go fight his way out of the Dai building. This fight sucks. You get swarmed super hard by guys with weapons, and you're confined to this small circle. The guys on the outside even push you away if you get too close. I'd still take this over the Chapter 8 long battle into Lauka Long true combo any day of the week though. Just as Kiryu's getting tired, Majima storms in a truck. The two of them escape together, and the chapter ends. Mine shows off his Like a Dragon Infinite Riz, and Kiryu takes a flight back to Okinawa. He gets the Ryudo boys up to speed with everything that's happened, as well as Nakahara, who's finally been discharged from the hospital. Tamiya calls to let Kiryu know that Toma is in a meeting and is safe for now, so we've got time to kill. You can probably guess, but this is just another excuse for more orphanage side quests. The first one involves Taichi seemingly getting hurt after a wrestling match with Mitsuo. The doctor fears that it may be due to abruptly onset asthma, and that he shouldn't wrestle anymore out of fear of another attack. This breaks Taichi's heart, so to cheer him up, Kiryu and Rikia set up a fake wrestling match for him. It turns out afterwards that Taichi only has a mild buckwheat allergy, which was triggered by him eating too much soba. I like this one. It's definitely the best one. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and shows how much Kiryu cares for his kids with a thick coat of that Yakuza brand goofiness. The second one involves Haruka hastily leaving the orphanage, and it appears that she's trying to hide something. Kiryu follows her around town to find that she's been hanging around with some pretty shady thugs. After dinner, she goes out again, and Kiryu follows her. It turns out that the thugs are using her as part of a credit card scam. Once she beat them down, Haruka reveals that she took the job after overhearing a conversation between Nikia and Mikio about some financial issues. It was all a misunderstanding though, as they were talking about how their rent is being raised at the Ryudo office, not at Morning Glory. One part of the story that I never got was how, if Haruka is so concerned about keeping Morning Glory afloat, why would she spend so much of the money she earned to help on a big, expensive meal? Otherwise, this story is fine. I wish it wasn't as long, but it's definitely not the worst of them. The third and final one involves Ayako, who feels underappreciated. She runs away after a few of the kids decide to be huge dicks to her for no reason, as kids do. You have to chase her around town to get her to come back, but at least we get a pretty heartwarming cutscene at the end. This one is similarly just okay. Tamiya gives you a call letting you know that Toma has gotten out of his meeting, and is at immediate risk of assassination. He points you towards a pole dancing bar in Ryukyu as the most likely place that he's headed. Once you get past the 50 seconds straight of nothing but close-up shots of strippers, accented by a horrendously off-key club song, Kiryu spots Toma sitting, having a good time, and Joji walking up the stairs. Kiryu charges at them in an attempt to defuse the situation, and barely manages to stop Joji from landing a clean shot on Toma. This is my favorite boss fight in the entire series, from both a gameplay and thematic standpoint. Incidentally, it also has my favorite song in the series as well, Lyricism Without Tears. Joji is, of course, another examination on the theme of family. There's a lot to go over here, so sit tight. When media covers the found family trope, it usually explores one of two things. Primarily, how you can choose anyone to be your family beyond blood relation, as long as you share a strong familial bond. And secondarily, how you can reject someone related to you by blood as family if that same bond is not there. These act as two sides of the same coin. Yakuza 3 has already covered both of these in the beginning segment, but instead of retracing those steps, Joji is used as a different interpretation of these two. If the first theme states that family goes beyond blood because you can choose a non-relative to be family, and the second because you can choose a relative to not be family, then this third idea presented by Joji and Kiryu's dynamic asks us a question. In the face of a man who looks, speaks, and acts identically to the one you called your father, what stops you from considering that man your father? Whereas, traditionally, the topic of found family covers how family transcends physical barriers, this dynamic shows how it transcends mental barriers as well. Joji is not Kiryu's dad, not just because he isn't Shintaro, but also because he did not share all of the time and experiences with Kiryu that Shintaro did. The reason that Kiryu can fight Joji without restraint is because he can go past the mental barricade of seeing someone who is physically the same as his father. It ultimately boils down to the same idea of family being the people who you share the strongest bonds with, but it's unique in how it changes the problem but arrives at the same solution, thus reinforcing the idea. One great thing about this fight is how you can view it in two ways that are completely opposite of each other, and get two different but equally valid and thematic readings. If Kiryu does not see Joji as Shintaro, you get what I just said about how family goes beyond mental notions, just as it does blood relation. But if Kiryu does see Joji as Shintaro, the theming of this fight suddenly becomes that of Kiryu moving on from living under Kazuma's shadow. He literally gets to fight a physical manifestation of his dead dad to do this. What I think is most likely though is that both of these readings are correct. Kiryu rejects the idea that Joji is Shintaro by saying that blood doesn't matter, and implying that even though Joji looks like his dad, they don't share the bond that Kiryu and Shintaro did. Despite this, in the back of his mind, Kiryu is subconsciously making the connection between the two of them, which gives the fight the subtext of Kiryu finally moving past and accepting his father's death, and being able to live as his own person. Even if Kiryu already has at this point, this is his time to truly prove it to himself and the audience. I feel like Lyricism Without Tears fits this idea, being this wide open, freeing track. It's not exactly fitting of a trained CIA hitman, but that's not the point. For those of you who are familiar with this series, what would you say that Daigo's theme is? I feel like most of you would say Farface, his boss track from Yakuza 4. The other option is his boss track from Yakuza 5, but that's not really his theme, is it? It's not. It's the theme of that specific fight between him and Shinada. This same idea applies to lyricism without tears. It's not Joji's theme, it's the theme of the fight between him and Kiryu. And that's why it's not some heavy rock or electronic theme like Soundstorm on the other CIA guy. Its openness is representative of Kiryu overcoming that mental hurdle. On the gameplay side of things, Joji is a stance-based boss, behaving noticeably differently when in and out of heat mode. Outside of heat mode, he's a very dodgy fighter with many fast attacks and fake-outs. Most of the time, he won't attack you unless you try to attack him first. In his heat phase, he becomes super aggressive and gains knockdown immunity. Joji can dynamically change between heat and no heat throughout the fight to keep you on your toes, and I love just how many options you have to deal with him. He's a huge refresher from Lauka Lame in the Circle of Doom. Kiryu defeats Joji, and he swears that he won't go after Toma anymore. This ending bit is another minor instance of the theme of family. While Toma and Tamiya aren't exactly father and son, Tamiya does act as a mentor to Toma, and you'd be surprised at the overlap. Joji wakes up from his beating and explains some of the loose threads to Kiryu. It just so happens that he didn't shoot Nakahara or Daigo. Instead, it was all the doing of his CIA buddy that tagged along with him. He also clues Kiryu into Daigo's whereabouts, Toto Hospital. But before Kiryu can head off to protect him, Taichi storms in with dire news. Mine and the Tamashiro have demolished Morning Glory. Rikiya was injured, Mikiya was barely hanging on to life, and Nakahara was kidnapped. Once again, as much as there is to unpack here, I do want to save my thoughts on Mine until the very end. I want to have all the cards before I start trying to put them in order. To very quickly touch on this last bit with Joji, this scene here has been very controversial for how Joji completely drops his orders from the CIA to kill Toma just because Kiryu beat him. Yes, this isn't very realistic, but in Joji's own words, all that they care about is achieving the proper result. It goes to show Joji's compassion and how, even though he and Shintaro separated long ago, he still has many similarities to his brother. Later that night, Kiryu goes to rescue Nakahara. Rikiya begs to tag along, but Kiryu sternly refuses. Rikiya understandably wants to help save his boss, and at the same time, prove to himself that he's a man, that he can help the people he cares about in the same way that Kiryu does. But Kiryu doesn't see it that way. He doesn't want Rikiya to mindlessly throw his life away. And with that said, he heads off to the bull ring. Tamashiro lured him there as a distraction, to keep Kiryu's attention while Mine makes his way to Tokyo. Nakahara gets thrown into the bull ring to fend for himself, while Tamashiro sicks his boys on Kiryu. But just in time, Rikiya shows up with Saki, having disobeyed Kiryu's words. He alerts Tamashiro that he's called the cops, but this only causes him to set off the bulls. And just when one starts to charge...
Huh? Osho!
Nagara!
It's a lovely little way to come back around to the scene from the beginning of the game. In accepting each other as father and daughter, the relationship has helped both Nakahara and Saki in this time of need. The concern for her dad caused Saki, in a heated moment, to regain her ability to speak. The need to be there for his daughter gives Nakahara the strength to literally grab the bull by the horns and save himself. All of this build-up, unfortunately, leads to the absolute worst boss in the game. It starts with a giant group of guys all with weapons. This part takes way longer than I'd like it to, and just isn't fun. When you beat them all up, you jump into the bull ring and go one-on-one with Tamashiro. For a little bit at least. Gun Tamashiro might be the easiest boss in the game when he's on his own, but dealing with him and a swarm of goons is not a fun experience. He does this like 3 times and it doesn't get any better. If there's anything to be grateful for though, it's that when he goes into heat mode, he gains this double kick attack. It's very predictable and doesn't actually deal any damage, so it's a pretty free Tiger Drop opening. With Tamashiro defeated, and Crisis, wow that's the chapter title, averted, we get a sweet little reunion between Nakahara and Saki. Kiryu makes the biggest mistake you can in this universe though, and he leaves the gun around a supposedly unconscious villain. Tamashiro makes one last attempt at finishing Kiryu off, but Rikiya steps in the way. Just a few moments too late, Joji comes in and lands a clean headshot. The Rikiya death scene is incredibly divisive within the community because of how Kiryu is full on sobbing over a guy we just met in this game. I do agree that this scene is played up a bit too much, but I think it would be better if more death scenes were like this, if a bit dialed back. I completely understand Kiryu letting it all out like this though. While at this point you've been playing the game for maybe 10 to 12 hours, canonically, Kiryu has known Rikiya for well over a year. In that time, Rikiya has been his friend, has acted as a caretaker for his children, and has basically been part of his family. Beyond that, Rikiya was still young. He's implied to be somewhere around his early to mid-20s, and Kiryu, once again, feels like he has failed to protect someone who needed him. This still doesn't excuse how all Kashiwagi got was a few name drops and a sad face before Kiryu ran off. I understand that he needed to hurry out of the building, but I still fail to see the issue considering the series' tendency to practice time manipulation. Even if I do find myself defending Rikiya's death scene, I don't know how I got more out of Kiryu than the brutal murder of the guy who was basically his uncle. One good thing about this scene though is the great use of a guitar and piano version of Fly, the game's final boss theme. You wouldn't have heard it at this point outside of the intro on international versions of the game, but even then, you likely won't make the connection that this is Fly until repeat playthroughs. And considering the content of this scene, that name has a much more depressing connotation. At last, our final chapter begins with Mine set for takeoff on his way to Todo Hospital. While I will be saving Mine's analysis until the end, I do briefly want to discuss this scene right now. Up until now, we've barely gotten any glimpses past Mine's front that he puts up to most people. This is the scene where he finally lashes out and has his true feelings revealed. This is very much a reaction to trauma, which is a running theme throughout all of Mine's appearances. Keep this in mind as we go through the finale. Kiryu catches a ride on one of the CIA jets, provided by Joji, which is also how he managed to get from Okinawa to Tokyo so quickly. Kiryu says what might be his last goodbye to Haruka, and he heads off to stop Mine. The entire Hakuho clan is there to greet him, so he's not going to get there without a fight. This is the final long battle of the game, and what a finale it is. It starts with a circle of doom like in Chapter 9, but this one is much less bullshit and a lot more fun. These guys really just let you go buck wild. From there, you fight your way up the first few floors of the hospital until you find the Hakuho captain. This guy actually sucks dick, and the only way to really get any damage is to bait an attack and parry. Even then, his moves don't have great tells, but I did find that if you land a guard break, he will always do an attack right after, which is nice. After beating him, he tells you where Daigo is, and then you have to make your way through a long corridor of gun enemies. Gun enemies are unfortunately bugged in the remastered versions of Yakuza 3 and 4 to where they will almost never shoot, which makes this bid very easy. But it's still pretty fun to just grab a gun and shoot everyone, though this also only applies to pistol enemies. Shotgun and machine gun enemies work just fine, so you still have to worry about them. Eventually, you enter the elevator, fight a few more enemies, and make it to Daigo's room. This is an insanely good long battle, a definite S tier, and so is the unique music theme this one has, Clay Doll on the Cradle. Upon entering the room, Daigo and Mine are nowhere to be found. The only one in there is the CIA agent you fought in Chapter 5. I know the scene has been memed to death already, but it cracks me up every time how bonkers this guy's inflection and pronunciation is on everything.
If you're looking for Daigo, Mine's taken him up to the roof.
You find yourself fighting him again right in the hospital room, and I hate to say it, but this fight's piss easy. His aggression in the first fight made him very troublesome to deal with since he was in a group, but now that he's solo, it just creates a ton of openings for attack. He goes down easy, but he doesn't seem quite done just yet. Maybe it would have been a little more subtle if his theme didn't keep playing after you beat him for the first time. For this final fight, he pulls out dual pistols and a shotgun. CIA Guy's third fight is often touted as the best gun boss to ever come out of the series. Not that the competition is all that stiff. I do really like this fight though. It's not nearly as brain-dead easy as the last one, and it dynamically changes whenever he decides to switch his weapon. He's very comboable, so you can really exploit him if you know what you're doing. But getting that opening isn't always a walk in the park. Switching weapons goes beyond just a simple change in moveset too. Like Tamashiro 1, CIA Guy is a stance change boss, but instead of changing once when he goes into heat mode, he can change whenever throughout the fight. His pistol phase is a more well-rounded and speedy phase. He makes use of a lot of flips and dodges to circle around, but his attacks often have long wind-up animations that leave him very open. His shotgun phase drastically decreases his defense, completely removing his ability to block and limiting his pool of dodges to a predictable side roll. To shore up this weakness, his attacks are much faster and more potent, but if you can make it in, you have very little to worry about. Overall, a very solid penultimate boss. Kiryu finally reaches the roof of Toto Hospital and sees Mine next to a still comatose Daigo. I think it's finally time to discuss Mine and just why I think he's such a genius villain. Mine, like Kiryu, was an orphan, but instead of receiving the kind of life that Kiryu had, he was casted to the wayside. While Kiryu had someone he looked up to as a father and plenty of friends who would support him in his youth, Mine had nothing. Not only did he witness his own father's death, but he was constantly bullied by the other kids around him. This lack of love and support from anyone gave him a narrow and cynical view of life. He joined the Yakuza in an effort to find some kind of meaningful connection, and was lucky enough to find one with Daigo. Daigo treated him like an equal. He was the first person to ever give him any of the respect that he deserved. And now that Daigo is balancing on the edge of life and death, Mine feels lost again, and sees killing Daigo as his own twisted form of mercy. The same idea applies to when he bulldozed the orphanage. As extreme and fucked up as it is, to him, he's doing them all a favor, because he's projecting his experiences onto all orphans. It's an unfortunate truth that childhood trauma can cause people to grow up with warped views of the world. Challenging these views is very difficult due to how deep-rooted they can be, but no matter how hard they can be hammered in, Kiryu is going to deal with them the only way he knows how. Mine is the most badass final boss in the entire series. As divisive as Yakuza 3 is, almost everyone agrees that this fight is as good as it gets. Mine had style switching 6 years before that even became a thing. Mine is an absolutely electrifying boss that never slows down. In his first phase, he's fairly defensive and likes to use a lot of fast moves to keep you out. The key is to keep your distance and bait his dodge attack. Parrying it gives you a good opening to do whatever you want. His second phase is his Orange Heat phase, where he gains a new moveset and knockdown immunity. This phase is characterized by large, sweeping strikes, which are just as fast as any of his other moves. These attacks have long animations though, which leaves Mine open. Alternatively, you can bait this dodging punch flurry that he does, and parry. Mine's Red Heat phase is his most dangerous. He gains full super armor and becomes hyper aggressive. Your best bet is to run away because Mine does not fuck around in this phase. However, if you're feeling ballsy, you can try and hit a parry on one of his attacks. Don't expect to get much off of it though. Finally, Mine's Purple Heat phase returns him to his phase 1 moveset. He still has knockdown immunity like an Orange Heat, and he also has a healing move that can be parried with good timing or interrupted with a heat move or bounding throw after it starts. He'll cycle through these modes throughout his fight to make sure that you never get too comfy. Mine is a truly outstanding boss that you need to fight for yourself to fully understand the genius of. But like all bosses, the fight has to end at some point. This ending scene is vital for me to wrap up my thoughts on Mine. It's not often that you have a game that has a main theme that is bashed into your head in so many different ways throughout its runtime, only for the final boss to have it only as a secondary theme. Mine isn't directly tied to the theme of challenging the meaning of family. This idea is still present, with him finding his only true bond with Daigo, and subsequently treating him with the same love and respect as he would a member of his family. But it isn't what stands out to me as the main point of the scene. Mine's strongest theme, to me, is about overcoming childhood and familial trauma. Upon Mine's defeat, he says that, despite him losing everything in this moment, he feels at peace. He realizes that his wealth, the only thing he has left, is meaningless. That only true human connection can make him happy in life. He acknowledged this before the fight, but it took a reality check from Kiryu for him to internalize it. When he picks up the call from his secretary, she expresses her worry for him. He sees this as an opportunity to establish a real, tangible bond for the first time since Daigo. But whether it's a declaration of love, or simply a thanks for being by his side, he's quickly brought back down to earth. His secretary is just as caught up in the accruement of wealth as he was, and with the press of a button, he proves to Kiryu and the player that he doesn't need it anymore. Money had always been an unhealthy coping mechanism for him. It was a way for him to believe that he had worth, because growing up, everyone around him told him he had none. The only exception was his father, but when he died, he was truly alone. When Daigo got shot, Mine was afraid that he was going to lose the only thing that gave him real meaning in life, which is what set him on his warpath for the chairman spot. And now, getting beaten by Kiryu has made him realize that his way of coping with his trauma was unhealthy and destructive for both him and the people around him. The reason he is so calm despite losing it all is because he now has an unclouded view of life and a fresh start with which to exercise it. In the middle of this, the CIA agent, who Mine tells us is actually Black Monday's leader, Andre Richardson, walks up to the roof. In the nick of time, Daigo awakes from his coma and shoots him and his boys with Mine's gun. This isn't quite enough to stop him though, so in a last-ditch effort, Mine charges at Richardson, grabs hold of him, and steps towards the edge of the roof. Unfortunately, with his newfound clarity, he now has to deal with the weight of his actions coming down on him all at once. Mine thinks that the only way to atone for his sins is with his death, and despite the pleading of Kiryu and Daigo, he jumps, taking Richardson down with him. And after a brief moment of silence, Joji comes in with a rescue helicopter and takes Kiryu and Daigo to safety. After a short ending scene which kinda sucks and falls pretty flat actually, the credits roll. It's revealed that Kiryu's fine, so it doesn't matter anyway, and the game ends. There's one final thing to cover before concluding this section, however, one which I've alluded to a few times already. It's how the most recent games in the series, Yakuza 7, aka Yakuza Like a Dragon, and Yakuza 8, aka Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, have seemingly been trying to erase the events of Yakuza 3, particularly when it comes to character deaths. The three examples of this are Kashiwagi, Lau Kalong, and Richardson/Mine. Kashiwagi, apparently having survived being fucking shredded by a minigun, is the owner of the Survive Bar, which serves as a hub of sorts for the party in 7. Lau Kalong, surviving a clean shot to the head, now serves as a weapons dealer and summon in Yakuza 7, under the moniker of Chow Kalong. And finally, Richardson is the owner of Revolve Bar, which appears in Yakuza 8. Considering that Richardson somehow survived a fall from a 40-story building, there's a chance that Mine also survived. As a whole, I'm not too concerned about these retcons. Kashiwagi's death was never given the weight that it deserved, so I'm actually kinda glad that he ended up living. I really couldn't give a damn about whether or not Lau Kalong lives or dies, and I'm actually really excited to see what they do with Mine if he ends up being brought back. One point of contention with the possible retcon of Mine's death is that it would make his sacrifice meaningless. I disagree with this. The idea behind this is that Mine gave his life in order to atone for what he did. But if he didn't actually die, then what's the point? I understand where people are coming from with this line of thinking, but it's still misguided. It's not the outcome of the action that matters, but instead the intent behind it. Mine jumped off the hospital fully expecting to die for the sake of saving Kiryu and Daigo. Whether or not he actually dies is irrelevant, as either way, the intent behind the action was to sacrifice himself to help the people he cares about. Talking about this may be pointless because Mine still might be dead even with all the hints telling us that he might not be, but no matter what, I'm still excited to see what the future holds for this character and this series. And well, that's Yakuza 3. As is hopefully obvious from the analysis, I really love this game, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. This game has a lot of issues, like its wonky combat and over-reliance on the orphanage, though I do think these issues are overblown by some people. The plot and themes are absolutely fantastic in the first and last 3 chapters of the game, but the middle section, while still enjoyable, leaves much to be desired. When this game is on though, it's on, having some of the best gameplay and theming in the series. In my opinion, all of the good aspects of this game vastly outweigh the bad, and that's due in no small part to how much I can connect with it. I've already stated how this game has helped me with my conflicting feelings with my father, but I love how this game goes a step beyond that and touches on the trauma you can be left with from dealing with family like that. I love Mine so much because of how eloquently and maturely he represents and conveys how familial trauma can affect your relationships with others as you grow older. It leaves you with a yearning for that kind of connection, but no real means with which to attain it, leading you to push others away out of fear of the same outcome. Most importantly though, Mine proves that no matter how bad it gets and how much it affects you, you are not defined by your past experiences. You can always bounce back and turn into someone that you can be proud of. For a game from 2009, this kind of messaging on trauma and mental health is unprecedented and paints the game as being way ahead of its time. One last thing. A small detail that gets overlooked about Mine's fight is the ending. Once you drain all of Mine's health, he tries to throw one last punch, but in his exhaustion, he misses, and his punch instead turns into a hug before he falls to the ground, defeated. Not only does Mine gain a new perspective on his life from fighting with Kiryu, but this unexpected hug, without words, brilliantly shows how grateful he is to Kiryu. The tragedy of all of this is that many people won't bother to sift through the bad parts to get to the good. Video games, as an art form, are incredibly complex. Take painting, for example. To make a good painting, all that you need is a good idea, good messages behind that idea, and the skill and resources to put that idea down on the canvas. Alternatively, think of writing a book. All you need is the idea, the themes, and the time to flesh it out into a book. This is not to say that making a good painting or writing a good book is easy. It certainly isn't. The point I'm trying to make is that, removed from the amount of skill and effort that it actually takes to create a painting or a book, the basic concept of what you need to do is fairly straightforward. On the other hand, making a video game, especially one of the caliber of Yakuza 3, requires so many different skill sets and is an incredibly convoluted task. Books and paintings are often made by one single person, but because of how multifaceted games are, they are often made by teams of dozens or even hundreds of people, like coders, modelers, writers, artists, musicians, voice actors, etc. Having a lot of moving parts to a piece of art like a video game can also mean that there are a lot of different places in which things can go wrong. In Yakuza 3's case, the combat and some parts of the story suffered in some areas, but I think that defining a game by its rough edges is disingenuous. Like Superliminal, approaching Yakuza 3 from a non-emotional angle is to experience the game in a way that it was not intended. My own connection with this game has helped me see that. I love that my own experiences have allowed me to enjoy this game to a higher degree than other people have. Even if you don't share them, I still highly recommend playing Yakuza 3 and keeping what I've said in mind. You might not find the same resonance with it that I do, but you at least won't end up with a review like this. I'd like to have a bit of a wind down after that particularly long part, so go get a drink, use the bathroom, whatever you need to do. I mean, I guess telling you that is pretty pointless because you can just pause the video, but I'm trying my best, okay? But before we're making the transition from games of my present to games of my past, I'd like to briefly discuss another game that I'm quite fond of, which has seen a lot of exposure in recent times, not all of it being good. This part is going to be shorter and less analytical than the past two, both to serve as a palate cleanser and because there's a really specific point that I'm trying to make here. I still think it's important to mention though. This is the good, the bad, and the edgy of Metal Gear Rising. MGR, at this point, really needs no introduction, but to briefly explain for the three of you who've been living under a rock, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is a 2013 hack-and-slash spin-off/side game of the Metal Gear series. It follows Raiden, protagonist of Metal Gear Solid 2 and deuteragonist of Metal Gear Solid 4, ripping and tearing his way through a political conspiracy 4 years after MGS4 in the far-off distant future of... It was generally highly regarded whenever it came out, but had an unprecedented resurgence of popularity in late 2021. I first played MGR in early 2021, scarily close to the irony-filled death pit that is the meme resurgence later that year, which I am ashamed to have contributed to. But don't worry, I'm not like any of those frauds. I've actually played the MGS games, except 4 because that one's stuck on a console that's almost old enough to consent. My favorite one's Peace Walker because I desperately want to be different. I first found out about the game from a meme. An actual meme, not whatever the hell this is. It played The Only Thing I Know for Real, and I thought the song was really awesome, so I went and searched it up, found out it had an entire album of songs just like it, and that they were from a Metal Gear game, and I decided that I needed to play it expeditiously, and so I did, and the rest is history. Needless to say, I absolutely love this game, but I also can't stand it, mainly for 2 reasons. Let's start with positives though. Why exactly do I like this game so much? I've already stated that the amazing music is what pulled me in, but it runs a lot deeper than that. The combat, while not the greatest I've ever seen, is fast and exhilarating. The characters, while not being the most complex, are funny and likable. The levels, while being somewhat inconsistent in scale and quality, are very fun and ooze that PS3 era spirit. This game is very much not perfect on many levels, but I could never hate it. It's the game that made me a YouTuber. MGR has opened the door for so many opportunities for me. It's gotten me into speedrunning events. It has amassed thousands of views and subscribers for my channel. It has let me collaborate with big names I had never thought that I'd ever touch. It has helped me become a much better editor. All these things and so much more. I can never repay this unfinished and completely bonkers 7-hour PS3 game for all of the great things it's done for me. But at the same time, I hate what this game has become. My first of 2 reasons that this game has fallen out of favor for me is because of the aforementioned big meme resurgence. If you have a game that you love, I'm pretty sure the last thing you want is for it to become mainstream. You know what happens when people who know nothing about your game get their grubby little hands on it. Everything you know and love about the game will be mischaracterized, flanderized, and commoditized. It's truly horrific to see a game, or any work for that matter, get turned into an unrecognizable beast at the hands of people born without the gift of media literacy. In the case of MGR, it was the memes. For a while, I thought they were funny. Keep in mind I was 15 years old. Eventually, though, the MGR brain rot got to me, and it was sad seeing Raiden turn into the next based Sigma Chad character with all the dumbass bait-and-switch memes and shit like that. With time, any fanbase that grows this bad will quickly collapse under its own weight, and this leads to the other side of the problem. The well-deserved backlash to whatever the fuck this was eventually caused some people to overcorrect and pretend like MGR as a whole was always a bad game, and you should jump into a volcano if you disagree. I definitely don't think that MGR is a flawless game, and there are some valid criticisms that can be brought against it. Some people don't like the direction that Raiden's character was taken in. I personally don't mind it, but I can understand why you might not. The combat is very simplistic and lacks depth. I think the game still plays fine with what it has, but it definitely is lacking compared to other action games. There are definitely good reasons as to why you may not like this game, but blindly hating a game gets you nowhere and does no good. I love this game and can never not love it despite this, but seeing the community turn into an endless cesspit of fighting just sucks. The second reason why I don't like MGR as much as I used to is because of the speedrunning community. This is more of a personal reason rather than a community-wide reason, but it's still important. I was a part of the speedrunning community for a time, and was even a verifier on the SRDC board and moderator in the Discord server. If you speedran a game before, you know how hard it can be to push yourself to keep going. Grinding the same game for months on end can take a toll on you, and I definitely found myself burnt out after running the game for some time. That's not what I'm talking about though. I'm talking about the people in the community. Now, I don't want this video to devolve into an expose on the MGR speedrunning community. I already did that in an interview I did a while back with a guy named Chris Citrick who had similar grievances. Link in the description. If you want the nitty gritty, go there. But I'll share one example here. Now, you may not have heard, but there was a guy who did a speedrun of the MGR Blade Wolf DLC by the name of Mecharazium. He got a bit of backlash for it because it turned out that the run was pre-recorded and spliced. This happened at a small-time speedrunning event known as SGDQ 2022. This was a falsified world record that was shown to thousands of people and had only been uncovered after the event had already concluded. Being on the speedrun board and the Discord mod team, I found myself stumbling into the biggest speedrun cheating scandal of the year. Seeing as this was a huge disrespect to the integrity of speedrunning, and judging by the fact he didn't really seem to care that he cheated, and arguably even scammed people out of their money due to the run in question being a donation goal, me and some of the other mods supported banning Mecha from the board. As such, Mecha was banned from all GDQ events, was banned from the Metal Gear speedrunning Discord, and received absolutely no consequences whatsoever in the MGR speedrunning Discord, and was not banned from the board. You know, the only place that mattered. This is because the MGR speedrunning community has a despotic hierarchy. The people up top said that he shouldn't be banned despite the wishes of everyone else, and so he wasn't. If you were in my shoes, you'd know that the people responsible for most of what goes on in the MGR speedrunning community are some of the worst people to discuss anything with ever. It took like a year of constant discourse and at some points straight up bitching at the admins for a quality of life change to the board, which would remove 1 minute and 15 seconds from all PC runs due to a certain cutscene being unskippable only on PC. Beyond just being very stubborn and not working in the interests of the wider community, legitimate harm has been caused by the admins. Apart from letting a cheater get away scot-free, they are generally very hostile towards newcomers and have on 2 separate occasions literally bullied some of the moderators so hard that they chose to renounce their role and leave. Despite my very poor opinions of these people, who I have chosen not to name for a very specific reason, I ask that you don't attempt to hunt them down or harass them. That would make you no better than they are. Some of the members of the board and Discord's mod team are genuinely good people who deserve nothing but the best. I would hate for them to get caught in the crossfire. Since these events have gone down, I have been removed as a moderator of the Discord and verifier of the board for attempting to call out the bad ones. It's really suffocating that I don't have a proper avenue to express this. I certainly hope that this will call more attention to the abuses of the mod staff so there can be some actual change in the speedrunning community of a game that I care about so much. Many people will hail the importance of separating the game from its community. This is an unfortunate sacrifice that needs to be made in a world where misinterpretation and commercialization of art can lead to swarms of people who give your game a bad rep. I wish this wasn't the case. Interacting with the games community should be a part of the experience. Talking with people about games can lead to an all-new appreciation of them. And some games would be long dead without the community to keep them alive. As much as I love Metal Gear Rising, its community has tainted its views in the public eye and in mine. Unfortunately, sometimes communities like this can get out of hand, be it through indiscriminate and surface-level mass consumption, harassment and gatekeeping, or otherwise. I think it's true that you should both enjoy games separated from bad apple communities like this, and that those communities should strive to be better to stop dragging their game down with them. I just want people to treat games as what they are, as art. There's a point to be made about people who misunderstand games and whether or not they're part of the problem of video games not being seen as art. You know the kind. The ones who post idiotic takes on social media that completely misunderstand whatever it is they're talking about. Many will point to these people and tout that media literacy as we know it is dying. The specific reasons for these people seeming to explode in number and how they even get to be quote-unquote media illiterate in the first place is complex and multifaceted. But when it comes to video games, I have a theory. I think that the main reason as to why this happens stems from the separation of video games as art and video games as a plaything. They're both, of course, and don't take it from me. Take it from Kim Swift, a lead developer at Valve for Portal and the Left 4 Dead games. The idea here is that there's an increasing amount of people who engage with games as the latter, but pretend that they know what they're talking about with the former. This leads to gamers as a whole being seen as stupid, and in turn, hurts the reputation of the medium. But who am I to say this? I used to think that Persona 5 was the best game ever made. We finally reached the point in the video where I'll be shifting from games that I've played in recent years to games of my childhood. As we age, our viewpoints on video games of the past and present can change for many reasons, but one of the strongest factors for this is nostalgia. Nostalgia, when it comes to video games, is often viewed very negatively, as it can make you think that games from your past are better than they actually were, while dismissing newer games for not being the same as the old ones. While this is true, I don't think that nostalgia is always a bad thing. And to explain why, I'd like to discuss a game that I played many times growing up. One that I still liked, but has received a very mixed reception from fans of its series. That game is The Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning. The Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning is a 2006 game for the GameCube, Xbox, and PS2, with alternate versions on the GBA, DS, and mobile. It's the first entry in the Legend of Spyro trilogy, a reboot of the Spyro franchise after Year of the Dragonfly, A Hero's Tale, and Shadow Legacy had failed to reach expectations. Unfortunately, the trilogy failed to get the franchise on solid ground, and caused Spyro to go dormant until the Reignited trilogy in 2018. And even now, 6 years later, there's been no activity with the series whatsoever. The Legend of Spyro trilogy isn't mixed in the same way that Yakuza 3 is. At worst, Yakuza 3 is a 7 out of 10 and the weakest entry in the series due to some glaring issues, but still a solid game overall. At best, it's a misunderstood black sheep of the franchise with some forgivable flaws that are often overblown. At best, the Legend of Spyro games are earnest attempts at reviving the Spyro franchise that, while still enjoyable, fail at what they tried to do. And at worst, they are stupid, boring, and unfun mockeries of the original Spyro trilogy that completely butchered every good thing Spyro had going for it. While I have played A New Beginning countless times, I've only played The Eternal Night once a few years ago, and I have never played Dawn of the Dragon. I recommend this video by Dav Reviews, as he has much more knowledge of this trilogy and why it didn't work out than I do. I said that I played A New Beginning in my childhood, but the only console that it was on that we actually had was the Xbox. I really only played one game on the Xbox, and it wasn't Spyro. The only time that I ever played this game was when I would go spend the night at my grandmother's house, as she had a PS2. She had a whole slew of games for it, but Spyro New Beginning was always the one that I would play. I definitely think that part of the reason was that it was short. The game's only about 6 hours long, so I was able to start and finish it in one night. I still thought that the game was fun, and vividly remember wanting to play The Eternal Night so bad after seeing that it existed. I loved A New Beginning, and even if I only got to play it occasionally, I would still consider it to be an important childhood game for me. I think it's worth looking at things from your childhood again with an older, more experienced pair of eyes, so I went and replayed The New Beginning. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the game or a system to play it on. My grandmother got rid of the PS2 years ago, so I can't even call her to borrow it. Luckily, I have an emulated version that I found lying on the ground somewhere. Yeah. I will say that this is the GameCube version instead of the PS2 version. It's the same game, but when I played the PS2 version on PCSX2 a while back, some of the pre-rendered cutscenes had this weird rendering error where the models of the characters would get stuck while their colored ghosts continue playing like normal. This still happens in the GameCube version, but to a lesser degree. Also, I didn't realize that I could set the game to 16:9 until after I recorded everything, but hey, I love a good game in 4:3. Upon booting up the game, you're met with this absolutely magnificent title screen. This menu really hooked me as a kid, and it still does now. A New Beginning, as a whole, has pretty generic and unmemorable music, but this title theme is a massive exception to that. In tandem with the beautiful visual of the egg floating in the river, it sets the stage perfectly. But who cares about a damn title screen? Let's get this show on the road. A small intro cutscene plays, which gives a little background as to how the egg ended up there in the river, and it serves as a quick and effective introduction into the main game. The intro credits play and the title theme accompanies them. The first level serves as a pretty basic introduction to the main mechanics. You have a 3-hit combo and a launcher, a double jump, a glide, and a charge. You unlock some more stuff later, but this is a pretty standard toolset for a kid's game. Spyro's friend, Sparks the Dragonfly, gets captured by some baboon-looking things and uncovers his ability to breathe fire. You're tasked with fighting them off and saving him. This is your first real combat encounter in the game, and it's pretty fun, though the fun doesn't last. One of the biggest criticisms brought against this game is that the combat is way too shallow and repetitive. By the end of the game, all you'll be doing is painstakingly beating down wave after wave of enemies with no variance whatsoever. While I definitely feel this way as well, I think I accidentally revolutionized the combat in Spyro A New Beginning. Why did nobody tell me this game was baby's first Lost Judgment? If I'd grinded this from day one, maybe I'd be as good as T-Lover. If you couldn't tell by the fact that I said you have a launcher, this game has juggles. Here's what the game intends for you to do with a juggle state. However, a juggle state can be easily exploited for crazy amounts of damage if you know what you're doing. You don't actually have to do the third attack that sends the enemy downward. You can do just about anything else and it'll continue the juggle. Right now, having only unlocked the fire breath, you can't do too much, but a basic extended juggle you can do is launcher, aerial hit twice, fire breath before you hit the ground, full air combo, charge attack. Don't get me wrong. Even with the extended juggles, this game is still a repetitive, button-mashy mess, but there is a small amount of complexity if you wish to make it slightly less mind-numbing. After saving Sparks, Spyro goes to see his dragonfly parents and wanders off to go find his calling in life. The rest of this swamp section is unremarkable and pretty bland both visually and gameplay-wise. One strength of the game is its visuals, it's just that this swamp area is a huge exception. The game otherwise has some very nice looking levels, good character designs, and good effects. Good lord, does this game not skimp out on the effects. Spyro finds the big red dragon from the intro cutscene, who introduces himself as Ignitus. He catches Spyro up on things, letting him know that he's the chosen one, being the purple dragon born once every 10 generations. He lets Spyro know that Cinder, a black dragon, has laid waste to the temple at which Ignitus, the other guardians, and the eggs were located. Ignitus tells him that it's too late to save everyone from Cinder's wrath, but Spyro begs him for some answers and his chance to fill his purpose. Oh yeah, and the title theme is playing the whole time. Ignitus takes you to the ruins of the temple, where you must fight your way through some caverns to open the doors. You eventually make your way through and you get a basic combat tutorial. For some reason, Sparks makes a reference to the Wizard of Oz by saying that they're not in Kansas anymore. Not only does this imply that the game takes place on Earth, but also that it occurs during or after the existence of the United States. I don't exactly know when this game is, but this could possibly mean that Barack Obama is canon to the Spyro series. Anyway, this tutorial unlocks fire bombs. They're pretty useless for juggles though, outside of being a half-decent juggle starter. They knock enemies back, which cancels juggles, but this makes them a good finisher due to their good damage. Fire bombs will also shoot in the direction that Spyro is facing, which means that if you knock an enemy down with an air attack, as long as he is still facing down at them, a firebomb will be a direct hit. Or you can just spam them and clear an entire room if you want. After finishing your training, Ignitus sends you on a mission to Dante's Freezer to rescue Voltaire, one of the Guardians. And also the title theme plays again.
If you encounter...
Spyro gains the ability to fly, and we get an on-rail shooter where you don't actually have to shoot anything. And also the title theme plays again. I know I said that the title theme is good, but it seriously loses its impact the 4th time that it's played in the first hour of the game. 5th if you count the title screen itself. The game gets better at not using it as it goes on, but it really struggles to contain itself here in the beginning. The flying section itself isn't all that interesting though. It's boring to play and look at, but it's a transition to what is probably my favorite level in the game. Dante's Freezer is not only a raw as fuck name for a level, but it also has the greatest atmosphere of any part of the game, with the only possible contender being the final level. The ruined stronghold in a frozen wasteland is a fantastic setting, and its sparse use of music attributes to an eerie but still captivating aura. This level is also a huge difficulty spike. This game isn't as absurdly difficult as the Eternal Night is, but I'd still say it's far more challenging than you'd expect. This isn't a huge problem considering that you get infinite retries, but do expect to take quite a few deaths. Partway in, Spyro unlocks his Electricity Breath, the absolute best breath for juggles, and just in general. Electricity allows you to drag and throw enemies like ragdolls, and if you throw them off a cliff or other high place, it's an insta-kill. This is especially helpful for some of the longer combat sections in the game, including one later in this level. As for juggles, electricity takes up very little of your breath meter and can extend juggles far more consistently than fire can. Remember that comparison I made to Lost Judgment earlier? Well, it goes beyond just juggling. You also have on-the-fly style switching just like in that game. And while your different breaths aren't fully fleshed out styles like in that game, they add variety and complexity to your combos. After like 30 minutes of boring, dragged-out combat encounters, you finally reach the boss of the level, the Ice King. Too bad this fight sucks and your only viable option is to sit back and spam firebombs. Bosses in this game have no stun frames whatsoever, which means no opening for which to attack. If you go in, you will get hit and die, so have fun. Not to mention that this one in particular has ice physics. You save Voltaire, head back to the temple, and get your electric training. This unlocks electric bombs as well, which might be the single most important move for juggling in this game. They are a guaranteed ranged juggle starter and extender. If you have good timing, they can sometimes even override finishers in order to keep juggles going, and are a great option to save your juggle if it's about to drop. The only drawback is that they take a very wide arc before circling back and hitting the enemy, so you either have to orient yourself correctly to hit them as soon as they come out, or plan ahead for when they come back. Level 3 is the worst level in the game. It's visually unappealing and incredibly unfun due to its confusing layout and boring puzzles. There are a few decent combat sections like this circle thing or the part with the waterfall, but for every okay one, you also have one like the airship, a 5-minute long assault of enemies with no checkpoints. I know I'm blasting through this level, but there's genuinely nothing to say about it. You unlock Ice Breath, but it's largely uninteresting. It slows down enemies and has the ability to freeze weaker ones. It's completely useless for juggles too, but at least this level has good ambience. To cap off the level, you have another boss that's just as uninteractive as the Ice King. You rescue Cyril, the Ice Guardian, and learn the Ice Bomb. The Ice Bomb is okay for juggles as it's a quick but weak projectile. Its best use is to quickly double or triple tap a few into the enemy before jumping and continuing a combo, though this only works on larger enemies. Level 4 is pretty good. It takes place at an active volcano, so it looks cool, and it also shakes up the gameplay a bit. However, this is where the over-reliance on enemy spam definitely starts to become noticeable. I started to throw enemies off cliffs with electricity whenever I was able to, just to get to the next section faster. Partway through, you unlock the Earth Breath, the last and worst one for juggles. On its own, it's pretty useless until you upgrade it, at which point it knocks enemies back like fire bombs. After this, you get to an on-rail shooter, this time actually on a rail and with something to actually shoot. The cart section has 3 phases. The first has you behind the train, where you're tasked with shooting and ramming into the caboose while dodging dynamite from the baboons. Phase 2 has the track split, and now you need to shoot the train from the side. Finally, Phase 3 swaps the roles and has you being chased by the train. None of these are particularly hard, mind you, but it's nice how they at least tried to spice up the gameplay. After some more combat and platforming, you reach the boss of this level, which is the train. Despite what you might think, this is the best boss in the game, due to it having actual openings and reasonable ways to achieve them. If you bait the train into running you over, it will crash into the wall and let you attack it. Unfortunately, this makes you do way more damage, which makes the fight too easy, but it's still rather an easy fight over a boring one. Upon saving Terrador, the last of the Guardians, Cinder attacks, and we get the second flying section of the game. You still don't really have to worry about shooting the turrets, but Cinder is on your tail the whole time, which gives the section a little more suspense. And best of all, the title theme isn't playing. You get your final training for your Earth Breath, which unlocks the Earth Bomb. The Earth Bomb is pretty good, as it sets up juggles and even has the unique ability to rejuggle. It's very inconsistent at this though, so I wouldn't rely on it. Level 5 is an unrelenting purgatory of brain-dead enemy encounters that go on for way longer than they need to. This goes on for an hour straight with zero variation other than a rehashed Ice King fight with a different coat of paint. The only good part is that you get to practice and hit some cool juggles like this one. You do get a fake-out fight with Cinder before she flies away into a portal to do some evil magic shit, though. Spyro follows her and enters the final level of the game. This level is only like 15 minutes long max because it's only a short platforming section and a boss fight. But they really didn't cheap out when it came to this level's atmosphere. The alien space dimension is filled with these otherworldly bioluminescent creatures. You're surrounded by ginormous planets that seem so near yet so distant. The ambience of this level is insane too. It's like a mixture of those sounds that Xboxes would play if you left them idle, and the sounds that planets make. One thing I didn't even catch until watching the footage back is that sometimes you can hear a disembodied voice say Spyro within the ambience. I do feel like this would work a lot better if there wasn't a giant boss arena smack dab in the middle with Cinder flying around, but it's fine, I guess. Who knew that one of the eeriest and most creative interpretations of a space level would come from this little goober? So you get a rematch with Cinder. It's marginally better than the first fight, but it's still a new beginning boss. Cinder's attacks are at least somewhat dodgeable, but do expect to run in and die a lot while slowly chipping away at her health. On her last health bar, Spyro magically gains a new breath ability which I don't think/know is ever explained. You do a new special super attack, and you've successfully beaten the game. Spyro saves Cinder, and they all go home happily ever after. We get an alternate version of the title theme in the credits as a little bonus. I like both of them. They don't deserve to be wasted on a game like this. So, what was the point of all of that? A New Beginning doesn't have super strong takeaways, not like I expected it to. Did I just ramble about a game I played when I was little for no reason? Well, no. As much as I just shat on this game, I still love it. This is a defining game of my childhood. This was the first game that truly felt larger than life. It opened the door for me and my little kid imagination to run wild. All of the good things I did have to say about this game, I still noticed as a kid. I may not have been able to put them into words like I am now, but I still felt their influence on me. There's something very special about being a little kid and staying up well past midnight on a weekend to play through this game. There's something about that specific set of circumstances that make you feel so much more immersed with the game. It makes it feel that much more impactful. If you're within a certain age range, you've likely had that experience with a game on the PS2. Those of you like that know that there's something about the vibe that PS2 games give off. It's something about the graphics and the sound design that have to work around the hardware limitations at the time that just captivates you. But it's hard to put your finger on exactly what. But no matter what it is, you can feel it, and it leaves an impression on you. Especially when you're a kid. I feel like part of what I judge games on nowadays is how closely it can emulate those feelings of wonder and excitement. This raises some important questions though. Are my childhood experiences invalid because they don't represent how I feel about the game now, nor its actual quality? Is it fallacious or hypocritical to love this game while saying that it's bad? Am I blinded by nostalgia? And the answer to all of these questions is no, of course not. I don't think that it's wrong to like a bad game just because you played it in your childhood. Oftentimes I think that there's more to the equation than just playing a game when you're a child. There are so many games that I played when I was little that didn't leave as much of an impact on me as Spyro A New Beginning has. I think there's a real power in a game to give you experiences like this that may not be directly related to the game itself. Say, for example, you and someone else really like a certain water park. One of you may like it for the cool slides or because it has a nice lazy river, stuff like that. Maybe the other went there on vacation as a child, and they cherished the quality time that they were able to spend with their parents, who were otherwise busy with work. Both of these are valid reasons to like that water park, no matter if it is objectively a good or bad park. It served as an avenue for them to have that otherwise unrelated experience. Transfer this idea to video games. Even if A New Beginning is an objectively bad game, it still gave me that experience. At the end of the day, it still had a tangible, positive effect on me as a person. And it speaks volumes that this not great game was still able to give me that sense of childlike wonder. Being blinded by nostalgia is a real thing that can happen. You're blinded by nostalgia when you fail to see why something you liked when you were young may not be as good as you think it is. But I feel like I've demonstrated that Spyro A New Beginning is nowhere near perfect. There's this prevalent rhetoric that viewing art, including video games, through the lens of nostalgia is a bad thing. While not everyone thinks this way, I do think that the ones who do are perpetuating a harmful lie, whether they know it or not. Nostalgia can be a bad thing, like I've said. On top of glorifying things from the past, it can muddle your view of things in the present. But when utilized correctly, nostalgia is a great thing. It can help you appreciate things that are widely considered to be bad, and can increase your appreciation of things that are considered good. And after all, what's wrong with one more reason to like something? So, Spyro A New Beginning was a game that shows how nostalgia can affect your view of a game that is otherwise not great. Removed from my own personal experiences, it really doesn't have much going for it. The average kid who would have played it back then when it came out probably would have beaten it and then never thought about it ever again. But what about an actually good game from my childhood? What can that do? Well... Remember that thing I said in the last part about my old Xbox? I really only played one game on the Xbox, and it wasn't Spyro. Over the Hedge was that game. I mentioned a few games that I played in my childhood in the beginning of this video, but if I had to pick one to be the game of my childhood, Over the Hedge very well might be it. I have played and beaten this game around a dozen times at this point. Unlike A New Beginning, I feel like this game has held up fairly well. The odds are heavily stacked against it considering that it's a mid-2000s movie tie-in, but I do feel like this game is heavily overlooked. I would go as far as to say it's on the same level as something like Battle for Bikini Bottom, even though that game gets way more love and attention. Of course, SpongeBob is one of the most popular cartoons ever, and Over the Hedge is a one-off DreamWorks movie from almost 2 decades ago, so this gap in popularity makes sense. But as far as licensed kids games go, this is a real diamond in the rough. The first few levels of the game follow an altered version of the ending of the movie, because yes, this game is an unofficial sequel. Level 1 begins with a heist in Gladys's house. Her backyard is the tutorial for everything you'll need to know moving forward. But before that, I need to talk about this game's sense of humor. It's completely bonkers. It's similar to that of the movie, but due to the nature of it being a shitty licensed kids game, some liberties were taken. Every now and then you'll get some funny dialogue followed by a completely unrelated one-liner. This accidentally makes the game an expert at absurdist humor.
I wouldn't do that if I were you. What, breathe? That too, but I meant stepping into the light. Looks like some kind of amphibian.
Combat in this game is even more button-mashy than Spyro, but Over the Hedge's more floaty and responsive gameplay, as well as more varied gameplay segments, make the general combat stay fresh for far longer. In Level 2, you enter Gladys's house, rendezvous with the rest of the gang, and steal some food. The level ends with everyone but RJ getting captured by the Verminator. They break out, crash the Verminator van, run through the hedge, and enact the ending of the movie. You! Time skip to 1 year in the future, and all of the food and items in the forest have been destroyed. So, you need to go on a quest to get more. First stop is to the neighborhood for a new projector, but you first have to traverse through the streets to get to the right house. Level 6 has probably the worst delivered line in the whole game.
Animals, come out and play!
This guy is your first quote-unquote boss fight, said very loosely. You can take his gun, which makes it super easy, as if it wasn't already.
And that was the 12th time I caught rabies.
Animals will die if they catch rabies once. Progressing further through the level, we get, wait, what the fuck? According to mattweb.com, cast iron, the most common material used for fire hydrants, has a shear strength of 21,600 to 215,000 psi. Vern hits the hydrant with the curve of the hockey stick, which by using this diagram from Dimensions.com, I estimated to have an approximate surface area of 0.0072 meters squared. On the low end, this is about 674,000 newtons, and on the high end, it's about 6.7 million. Going further and converting this to joules, I used this image to find the width of the bonnet of a fire hydrant. Yeah, so somehow I couldn't find any clear information on the dimensions of a fire hydrant, even after searching for about 30 minutes. But I asked ChatGPT, and it told me that it can range anywhere from 8 to 12 inches. We can eyeball it and say that Vern embeds his hockey stick about 2 inches into the hydrant. Joules is expressed as the amount of force exerted over a certain distance. On the low end, Vern is putting out 34,239.2 joules of energy, around what a car engine may produce in a few seconds, and equal to roughly 8.2 grams of TNT when using the TNT equivalent metric. On the high end, it's about 10 times that, at 340,360 joules, achievable in a high-speed car accident and equivalent to about 81 grams of TNT. This is roughly 1/3 of the energy that is released from a stick of dynamite. The goats go through an OSHA-violating active construction zone and fight the most horrifying thing that I have ever seen. This spinning blade of death thing has multiple variations that you fight throughout the game, and every single one of them traumatized me as a kid. Hearing it rev up and charge at you with that persistent slashing sound made me shit my pants. And it's all for a projector. Not even a TV, a projector.
Vern, where does it say you can't avoid something by going toward it and crossing it?
The dictionary?
Never heard of it. Please, no more fire hydrant. I wasn't a hose then, and I'm not now.
Oh well, no one stays dry forever. It's just an old wives' tale.
How did this one make it to the final release? This backyard level introduces a few enemies, one of which is the rabbit. It immediately proceeds to give you a slightly beefed up rabbit as a boss fight. Excellent game design. In order to proceed, you need to get up to this RC plane, but first, you need some gas for an RC plane. Yeah, this requires some laser DDR, but hopefully you've been out of diapers for some time now. 9/11. As you can probably tell, unlike A New Beginning, this game goes for a lot of levels that can be beaten in 5 to 10 minutes, as opposed to a few hour-plus long levels. This prevents the game from getting stale and allows for a wider range of scenarios. This kind of level structure has its downsides, but I feel that Over the Hedge does a good job at avoiding them. Not every level is perfect though, like the next one. This is the first of many escort levels where you're escorting Ozzy and the wagon back to the log. They aren't terrible, but they're definitely less fun than the other missions. Next up is the quest for the popcorn machine, and that starts with the train level. The spinning blade enemies now come in a new barrel flavor. They make a Star Trek reference, and there's whatever the fuck this is. This is the start of some of the more experimental levels in the game. There's still a good amount of the traditional neighborhood levels, but the game isn't afraid to go to other locations as well. It's a rather unprecedented amount of love for a game of this nature, but I'm all for it. Next up is the shooting gallery, and I've never been a huge fan of this one. I did state earlier that Over the Hedge's combat isn't quite as repetitive as A New Beginning, but it's still repetitive. It's fine enough to be entertaining when it's in between the other aspects of the gameplay like the platforming, shooting sections, and other one-offs, but it can be draining when it goes on for too long without breaks. The shooting gallery is nothing but a long string of drawn-out fights in cramped arenas, with little in the way of variety. There's another very similar level later in the game that's essentially just a better version of this too. At least there's a running level right after this that serves as a bit of a refresher. Next level brings us back to the neighborhood, where we get the best boss fight in the game. Pink Castle! It's barely a boss. All you do is beat up the castle while a ton of enemies try to stop you. It's very easy, so just do it, grab the amphibian, and move on. It's really the same song and dance though. Enter the house, fight your way through, get the food, don't get hit by the lawnmower, and escort Ozzy.
I scouted it out just the other day. It was cold and cobwebby, desolate.
Which day was this again?
I told you, the other one.
Next up is the cave interiors. This falls into the same trap of the shooting gallery where it's nothing but wave after wave of enemies with little to break it up. It's still nowhere near the pain and suffering of level 5 of A New Beginning. Afterwards is a decently fun gimmick level, which is nice. And then what is one of my favorite levels in the game. Mountain Path strikes a perfect balance between combat and platforming. You have the option to knock enemies off the cliff, which is pretty easy due to the high knockback of your attacks, and the added verticality of the level makes the platforming more interesting. You also have a neat puzzle/combat hybrid in the level, which was pretty fun and unique. Eventually, you reach Vincent's den and have to fight him, as he's been placed under the control of the Verminator. The fight isn't all that deep, which is to be expected for a kid's game, but it's fun, and the huge number of collectibles is a nice touch.
Look, Vincent, we have a common enemy.
RJ?
The other common enemy.
This next part's a bit boring, so I'll be quick. Make your way through the sewers, go through the house, get the food, escort Ozzy, and play some Pac-Man. Next is the mini golf course, and this is the level that I was talking about earlier when I said there was a better version of the shooting gallery. It's still a level with a ton of enemies, but it's pretty fun due to it being more open and less hand-holdy.
Don't take this wrong, but if you get shocked, I might laugh.
Make your way up the roller coaster and have yourself a boss fight against Mr. Ropley, the guy whose shit you've been messing with and stealing for the whole game. Turns out this guy's a fucking wizard and has little regard for his own property, as he blows up an entire coaster track over the course of this fight. Luckily, as everyone knows, wizards are weak to sporting equipment, so this fight's pretty easy. Alright, we're in the home stretch. Ozzy tells everyone that Heather's been captured by the Verminator, and the first step in saving her is to go to Gladys's new house.
We're looking for Gladys's PDA, which is a human gadget that holds addresses they never visit and phone numbers they never call.
This requires going through some construction, and this level's pretty fun. The first segment can be cheesed just by throwing the amphibian over the lasers, though. The level ends with probably the best boss fight in the game, the Depelter. It's fun to fight and a decent challenge if you're 6 years old. I was able to cheese it by hitting a spin attack right in the sweet spot between its claws though, but still a good fight. The next level requires you to break into a moving truck. The dialogue between Vern and RJ here is insane because in the same exchange, Vern implies that Hammy is a terrorist and RJ breaks the fourth wall, which seems completely in character for him. Going through the truck leads you to a chase with Gladys in the Vermtech van, and once it crashes into her house again, you return to the log only to find that it's being overrun with Vermtech-controlled animals. While this fight is fun, it does drag for a bit too long, and doesn't give you any indication as to when it's going to end. At the very least, the enemy variety is good, and you have Vincent helping you out too. One of the moles that you save tells you that Heather has been taken to Vermtech, and it's time for you to go save her. Now in the final level, except technically it isn't, you're required to go through a slew of different rooms to open up a heavily guarded Vermtech basement. Upon doing so, you're thrown into a laser dodging section in the elevator. Getting hit by a laser will spawn a wave of enemies, but if you're good enough, you can avoid fighting any at all. Some of the laser patterns can be pretty tricky to dodge though, so do be careful. Final boss time. First you need to destroy all of the mind control machines while the Verminator shoots at you. After that, you need to shoot the computer wires until it falls down and, well, that's it. Kinda underwhelming, but it's a movie tie-in, so I guess I can't expect too much. Over the Hedge is the type of game that isn't particularly deep in any way, be it in its gameplay, story, or otherwise. It's the kind of game that you sit down and have some dumb fun with. This kind of game is very difficult to write about because the enjoyment that you get from it is very subjective and personal. That's true of all games, but other games, i.e. the ones that I've discussed in this video, have other reasons why you may like them. Other games may stick out with their gameplay, visual style, story, music, atmosphere, characters. There are many things that can make a game special. A game like Over the Hedge isn't like that. It isn't groundbreaking in any specific way, except for maybe its humor. The only way that you like this game is if you find the experience itself enjoyable. Me horribly abridging the plot and regurgitating the game's jokes at you isn't going to get you to love Over the Hedge. Only playing it will. Or it might not. Who knows? Don't take it from me, take it from my friend Winter.
Hi, I'm Winter, certified gaming expert. I was probably just as confused as you watching this video when Curve messaged me on Discord and asked me to play Over the Hedge for the PlayStation 2. I was actually moderately concerned about this since my gaming resume includes farming way too much weed on Minecraft and playing Valorant.
Oh shit.
But despite the confusion, I downloaded the game on a shady website, dragged the file into Dolphin, and... oh boy. Alright, what is this gonna be? Oh my god! The game starts out as any other would, on the title screen. It's simple, nice to look at, and it's all you need. Although it does have its quirks. Difficulty in the options menu, yeah! And with that small critique out the way, it was time to start the game. Before things go too far, I think I should mention that I've never watched the Over the Hedge movie, so I had absolutely no clue who anyone was or what was happening the entire time.
So just so you know, this has a completely different story from the movie.
Oh, I've never watched the movie.
Oh.
Once I was able to move, I started getting the general feeling of the game, watching the questionable AI and trying to learn how a controller works. Vern's my main. Okay, which one's X?
Top.
Oh, that's all. Top? I then discovered some of the collectibles and mechanics the game offered, such as collectible food boxes, pro golf hitting, and Garden Gnome Iron Maidens? Yeah, there are many, many other traps in the game that I somehow always manage to get hit by. I don't know, guess it's a skill issue or something. Anyway, I finally got to a point in the story where I can finally try out the combat system of the game. The combat mechanics of a game is one of the most important parts to me, as it is my favorite part of most games. So, what's the combat system like, you may be wondering? Just pressing one button. Over and over. Smacking things. That's it. Simple mechanics for simple minds, I suppose. Now, sure, in addition to just smacking things, you can use a special charge-up attack, which may seem super cool, but it locks you into place and it knocks enemies so far away it just doesn't really do much. Later on, of course, you do get guns, which are way too good, as it just straight up homes in on targets. But you only get those so often, so just smacking things it is. And that really covers the basics of the game. From a gameplay perspective, pretty much everything else is walk around, smack things, figure out easy puzzles, smack other things, and rinse and repeat. The story just kind of follows the same break into house and steal food plotline, which gets pretty boring after a certain amount of time. There are a few other cool sections, like the Wild West shooting range, and the amusement park scaling level.
Okay, this part is actually really good. I mean, it's... Oh my god! No, don't do it! No! He fell off the fucking building! No! He's about to die!
But other than those, I can't say I had any real memorable moments. Again, I didn't watch the movie at all, so I could be missing a lot of references or jokes from the movie in the game. That being said, at times the game did actually get a chuckle or two out of me, but I have such a broken sense of humor that I don't know if that says more about me or the game. Oh yeah, and they just kind of leave the last villain to die. Like, they just straight up leave him. Like, Jesus. Overall, I feel like the game could have a little more variety within its plot and mechanics, but hey, it's a kid game, and it achieved that goal. As a whole, the game itself was not bad at all, but it just failed to keep me intrigued as I'm not a big story game person. Anyway, that's it from me. Back to your yapping curve.
What I'm trying to get at here is that the Over the Hedge movie tie-in game isn't anything special. You may like it depending on who you are, but if you're like Winter, it may not be your thing. Especially if you didn't grow up on it. But I don't think that I'm wrong for liking it. Like I said, Over the Hedge and games like it are nothing more than dumb fun. But who's to say that dumb fun isn't meaningful? A reason that many people play games is to escape the stresses of everyday life. And Over the Hedge was that game for me as a kid. This game means a lot to me because of how I could always sink some time into it when I wanted to get away from the turbulence of my youth. As terrible, shameless, and cash grabby as a lot of licensed kids games can be, I do think that these kinds of games have their place. Many critics of video games will point to games like Over the Hedge as reasons why games are not art. They'll say that they're just dumb toys for children. To that I say, well, for one, I think it's disingenuous to imply that there's no value or artistic merit in children's entertainment. Entertaining children is an art in and of itself. But also, games that are meant for escapism are still valid as art. The mindset of considering games as toys for children is harmful to the industry as a whole, not only because it delegitimizes games as art in the public sphere, but also because this has the effect of hurting game preservation. Now, Over the Hedge is far from the most obscure old game to exist, but it and many licensed games of its nature and time period are suffering the same fate. They're slowly being forgotten about by all but their most hardcore fans. As bad as some games like this are, they should not be forgotten about. Sometimes we need video games to help us in our lives, but especially considering the current circumstances, sometimes they need us as well. If you feel that a game has given something to you, saving a game from being forgotten is your opportunity to give back. For what it's worth, Over the Hedge has given a lot to me, being one of the most memorable games from my childhood. If this video gets one person to at least think about playing the game, I'll consider myself to have succeeded. Old games and ways to play them are increasingly hard to come across. There's essentially no way to obtain a legal copy of many games nowadays. The rise of emulation has saved many games from becoming unplayable, but due to the diminishing supply, many people have decided to seek out alternative methods for playing their old games. But this isn't a be-all, end-all solution. Game preservation is a whole can of worms that I won't be going into in this video, but the first step of preserving a game is remembering that it exists, and it might be your job to do that. I want to be the guy that remembers the Over the Hedge game beyond just a game I played when I was little that I can watch a long play of on YouTube. I want to be the guy that keeps this game alive in the public consciousness. Whatever game you remember fondly, do your part to keep it around. It deserves to be remembered just as much as Super Mario Bros. Or Metal Gear Solid. Good things never last forever, but who's to say we can't keep them around for as long as we can? There is one catch though. Over the Hedge is a single-player game. There is a two-player option if you have a buddy to play with, but the game is completely playable on your own. But what about a truly multiplayer-only game? I'm sure you've heard the story countless times. Someone grows up playing a multiplayer game, but ever so slowly, the player base dwindles, until there's no one left to play with. This is natural for any multiplayer game outside of the absolute most popular ones. There is one in particular I'd like to talk about today, being one of the most tragic falls from grace I've seen from a game like this. For some of you, this section, albeit short, might serve as some deeply forgotten memories, because for the final game of this video, we'll be talking about Transformice. Transformice is an online MMO platforming game created by Atelier 801, where you and a group of others play as mice to find cheese and return it to your mouse hole. You do this with help from a shaman mouse, selected from the list of players each round, who uses an array of summons and magical powers to make a path towards the cheese and back. It launched in 2010, and according to this list on the video game sales fandom, which is a thing that exists apparently, it is the 28th most played video game of all time, surpassing 100 million registered accounts. This list doesn't count mobile games, barring ones that have ports to other platforms, but even if they were to be included, Transformice would still likely be in the top 100. So this game is nothing new. It's super popular, so why don't you ever hear about it? If we look back to that same list, we see that Transformice is sandwiched between League of Legends and World of Warcraft. Those games are definitely still alive and kicking. There is one ginormous factor to take into consideration though. Transformice is a browser game, one that runs on Flash. I'm sure there's one big event surrounding Flash that you're probably thinking of right now. Its discontinuation on New Year's Eve of 2020. Transformice was one of the really lucky Flash games to have already received an official port to Steam, and as of today, it is now the only way to play it. Think about it though. Transformice is a game primarily aimed at children and young teens, although I'd say one of its strengths is its appeal beyond that range. But either way, many of its original player base of 100 million would no longer be able to play, as the website for it would likely be their primary way of playing Transformice. Looking at Steam charts, this line of thinking seems to be correct. After Flash's end, the player count on Steam jumped to over 4,000 before coasting down to where it is in the current day, averaging between 1 and 2,000 concurrent players. I myself have not played Transformice consistently in 6 or 7 years, when I was around 11 or 12 years old. There would be times when I'd remember that it exists, play it again for a few days, and then promptly forget about it for a few years. But around 2016 was when I really played it. So today, we're going to give it another shot. I don't remember the information from my old account, so we're going to be starting completely fresh. But enough yapping, let's get into it. So, stupid me forgot to record the first few minutes of my session, but all that really happened was that I did the tutorial and then ran with the first lobby that the game decided to put me in. I played for around an hour and a half with the same group, and I had a lot of fun with it. Even after so long, this game still has the same charm it did all those years ago. Admittedly, I'm a little stumped on how to go about explaining to you just what happened in a way that's a little more engaging than just recounting it all beat by beat. Most of what it was just me playing the game. Every now and then I'd be shaman and I'd suck and get everyone killed, and then the next round I'd fail my wall jumps and die, but it was all just some dumb fun. But if that's really all there is to it, then I wouldn't have included it as the final section of this video. Transformice, as you might expect, has a chat function that lets you talk to people in your lobby. This is par for the course for any good MMO. A couple of the people saw me failing and dying and tried to give me some tips. I was grateful for this as I had basically forgotten everything from when I used to play. I thanked them and then told them I hadn't played in 8 years. And, well, that's when I felt like Transformice's inclusion in this video was justified. It felt nice to know that I wasn't alone in how nostalgic I felt for this game, to the point where after so long, we've all come back. This could be for the obvious reason that we all liked the game and wanted to play it again, but I think that, at least secondarily, it's because we don't want to see it go. There's a strange phenomenon that has started to happen in recent times on the internet where a thing that was abandoned or forgotten about a long time ago will finally end, and all of its old fans, no matter how long it's been since they thought about it, collectively mourn the loss and share all of their cherished memories with it. A recent example of this is when, after 11 years, Stampy Longnose ended his iconic Stampy's Lovely World Minecraft series. Many people who had grown up with the series, me included, had stopped watching for a long time at that point. It's not that it ever got any worse or anything, it's simply that we all grew up. We all got older and moved on to different things. But the truth is, we never stopped liking it. I, and likely many others who grew up with the series, felt like we owed it and Stampy himself a huge debt for helping define our childhoods. That's not something you can just give up and forget about. In the case of Transform Ice, the reason why I and others may be coming back is because we don't want to see yet another piece of our childhoods wither away. This section is quickly going to move away from Transform Ice. I haven't talked about the game itself much, because any MMO of its nature could work for the purposes of this video, but I don't want to completely skip over it though. I implore you, don't sleep on Transform Ice. This game is so chill and addicting. I really only got to talk about the vanilla mode, which the game auto-placed me into, but there's like 10 different ones, each with like 10 bajillion different maps to play on. Back in the day, I would every now and then go into these little village rooms and just sit and talk because it was so chill. I have no idea if there's enough people for that now, but it was nice and relaxing back then. And this is not to mention the basically infinite amount of user-created content within the game, which is not just maps, but also whole-ass game modes. This game was a third space for me for a bit, and I'm sure it was for many others too. Don't let me pretend like the game is completely dead though. You can still find full lobbies, especially on the main game modes. In my hour and a half of playing, I was stuck in vanilla, which is a little less popular than normal. The only difference is that normal contains community maps and not just the official ones. I actually hopped in a normal lobby just to check though, and sure enough, there were a ton of people there talking about getting high on shrooms. Point is, this game is awesome. If you want a place to relax and play a simple MMO with some people, Transform Ice is that. If you want to hop online and talk, Transform Ice is that. If you want to get crazy good at something by either mastering the movement or figuring out what the hell to do when you're shaman, Transform Ice is that. This game is everything, and it's no wonder it's been around for 14 years, and if possible, I'd like to keep it around for years to come. While I hope that this speaks for the game's quality and fun factor, it also makes the dwindling player count hurt that much more. The game is still fun and is still supported by the devs after all these years, but there's a time limit on it that's only going down faster and faster the more obscure this game gets. I can't stress enough how much I want people like you to keep this game alive, so please, give it a try, or even return to it if you've already played it long ago. This game deserves to stick around for as long as it can. The thing is though, other games have already met this fate. Let's go back to what I said earlier about Flash. Transform Ice was one of the really lucky Flash games to have already received an official port to Steam, and as of today, it is now the only way to play it. The amount of Flash games that got the same treatment as Transform Ice is infinitesimally small compared to the amount of them that exist. So, what about those? Well, there's Flashpoint, the project that aims to preserve as many Flash games in a playable state as possible. This is a great way to play old Flash games, but for one, you can only preserve what you can find, which means that any Flash game that hasn't been found remains completely unplayable. And two, Flashpoint themselves state that games that require a server and have zero single-player content are not allowed to be on the service, citing that the amount of work it takes to preserve these is too high relative to what else we can be working on. Looking at the list of other preserved multiplayer games on their wiki leaves much to be desired. This list hasn't been updated since October 2022, so it may have expanded since then, but my point still stands. Of course, this isn't just a Flash game issue. Sometimes games are just too old and people have moved on to new things. Want to play an old COD game? Haha, fuck you. The fact of the matter is, be it from age, discontinuation, or otherwise, multiplayer games, even if they are preserved and playable, can't stick around forever. At some point, the only thing that remains of them, be it in your mind, written down, or in a video, are the memories. As beautiful as nostalgia can be, there's almost always a pain to it. It's the same kind of pain that you feel from loss, which can seem hyperbolic, but it's the same idea. You're saddled with the notion that as good as things were, they will never be that way again. You can try and fill the hole, but it'll never make you feel the exact same way. This is true whether it's a family member, a pet, a job, a keepsake, a residence, a friend, a place, an opportunity, an item, or even a video game. The final step in dealing with loss is acceptance. Acknowledging that things aren't going to go back to the way they were. You may still be sad about it, but you're able to appreciate what you still have in its absence. Moving on from loss is important, but it doesn't mean that you have to forget. I've made apparent that there's a long-standing debate on whether or not video games count as art. I'm certain that I've made my stance clear in this video, but the main reason why many people don't consider them art is simply because they are too shallow and lack quote-unquote artistic value. They say that too many video games are just stupid fantasies only intended to inject as much dopamine into your brain as possible. It's true that not every video game is deep or takes itself seriously, but I think that's misunderstanding what art is. Would a kid's cartoon not be art because it isn't deep or serious about itself? Of course not. I do think that there is artistic value in children's entertainment. Art, at its core, is something that is intended to express emotions or ideas. For what reason should fun, whimsy, excitement, etc. be excluded? These are valid things to express and try to make people feel. People keep art around because these feelings are important to them. Art can influence people in so many ways. It can change your way of thinking. It can help you process trauma. It can spark competition. It can excite your imagination. It can relax you. It can connect you with others. All of this and so much more. And this influence is why we keep art, including video games, in our minds. I said earlier that a consequence of games not being seen as true art are that preservation efforts are subpar compared to other media. It's common knowledge that most video game companies don't give a damn about their old games, and rarely give players legal means in which to play them. Even when they do, there's a good chance that they end up being mediocre ports that are far worse than on original hardware. This is why video game piracy has become so huge. People want to play old games, but without it, they can't. Moral of the story here is, video games need you just as much as you need them. Sometimes it's just to spread the word of their existence. Sometimes it's to be a part of their prosperity. And sometimes it's to stop them from being gone forever. Your favorite games and the experiences you've had with them are worth something. I believe it's the same way with mine. Video games have given so much to me, and it would be impossible to fully repay them. The best I can do is dedicate a section here in this video to some of the games that I would like to thank. Thank you, Skylanders. Your later entries may have sucked, but you were some of the first games I ever played. You played a big role in what games I like today. Thank you, Call of Duty Black Ops 2. I'll never ever forget those late 9 games of Buried that I played with my stepbrother. Thank you, Plants vs. Zombies. PvZ1 is the first game I ever searched up on YouTube, and a fun game in general. Garden Warfare 1 and 2 are some of the first multiplayer games I ever played, and by far the greatest shooter games I've played as well. Thank you, Minecraft. You really let my creativity shine when I was a little kid, and you introduced me to some great friends on my 360. Even if I haven't talked to them in years, I'm glad that you're still around. Thank you, Papa Louie, for the endless amounts of fun you gave me at school. Cheetah Wolf series on your games were some of the first YouTube videos I ever watched, and had a profound effect on my sense of humor even to this day. Thank you, Castle Crashers, for being a game I would always play with my uncle when he'd be in town. He's a part of the reason I got so into video games, and he may even be watching this video right now. Thank you, Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort. So much fun has been had with the both of you. You're also how I got the name Curve Nasty Jr. Thank you, Pokemon Legends. You may have been a pretty mediocre Pokemon web game, but 10-year-old me didn't care. You're also the first time I ever used Curve Nasty Jr. as my username. Thank you, DDLC. You're a mediocre visual novel, but you were the game that got me onto the internet and made me make my Discord account. You'd also be what eventually gets me into visual novels as a whole. Thank you, Call of Duty World War II. You were very overhated, especially when compared to the more recent CODs. You were just some simple, dumb fun, and you kept me occupied during a very turbulent time in my life. Thank you, Smash Ultimate. You're an incredibly fun game, and you've allowed me to meet some of the best people I've ever known, be it from the competitive or casual scenes. Thank you, Kara no Shoujo 1 and 2. You're the first real visual novels that I've played and some of the best games I've played in general. I hope that more people will become receptive to visual novels so that they'll give you a chance. And of course, thanks to all the games that I mentioned in this video. Superliminal for helping me through a rough patch in my life and just being a really awesome game in general. Yakuza 3 for being a game with an unwavering soul and an important message on family, as well as the rest of the series for being equally as great. Metal Gear Rising for being a great game that made me find a lot of great people. My editing skills and this YouTube channel would not be where they are today if it wasn't for you. The Legend of Spyro, A New Beginning, for being a childhood game that I could always come back to time and time again, and for sparking my imagination from such a young age. Over the Hedge, for being a fun game for me to slip away into when life was unstable, and being a huge part of my childhood. And Transformice, for being a space that I could go to socialize and have fun when I had no other option. If any of you have had experiences like mine that you would like to share, please leave them in the comments. I believe that we all should be more open to talking about profound experiences like these, and I would like to hear just how video games have affected you. Video games as a whole have become a cornerstone of modern entertainment. They are unique in that they require input from the person interacting with them, unlike a book or a movie. You have say in what goes on in a video game, and that's why I think they've become so popular in the past half-century. Maybe it's as simple as wanting to actually feel like you're doing something by interacting with a game. Or maybe it's something deeper. Maybe people play video games to feel like they're in control, or to feel like they're a part of something. Maybe it's all of these. Who knows? No matter what the case may be, it's an unfortunate fact that many people don't treat video games with the respect that they deserve. Gaming in the past couple of years seems like it's been chewed up and spat back out into an unrecognizable pile of slop that's only meant to keep you on a dopamine rush that siphons all your money into companies' pockets. Each new game is aiming to be the next Fortnite or Genshin Impact, spiraling into the vile ideology of games as a service, and sidelining actual creativity. Even the truly good games that are coming out seem to be built upon the exploitation of workers, who are similarly being run through the ringer and subsequently discarded. Things are looking bleak for the industry. I wish that I could say that everything is okay and that it'll all turn around, but it's not my place to make that call. As long as greedy executives are around, they'll do whatever it takes to make more money. There's a whole other can of worms about how modern consumers are less inclined to deeply engage with art and will instead go for whatever is instantly gratifying. I am in no way educated on this topic, but if I had to take a guess, this is due to the inadequate education on art in schools and the ever-presence of short-form content in today's world. It's easy to look at all of this and feel defeated, and I can't blame you for that, but I think it's crucial to think about it in a different way. If you feel like no one's on your side, then speak up. Be the change that you want to see in the world. If you spend long enough spreading the idea that a game you like is worth someone's time, maybe they'll start to listen. I'm not going to pretend that every game ever made is on the same level as Picasso, and I'm certainly not going to analyze the societal implications of Click to 10, because this guy already did. The reason I made this video is to explain why I think games deserve to be thought of as art, but I also made it because I wanted people to hear what I had to say about these games. These games have given me so much, and this is my way of giving back. I think they're just as much art as any painting, film, song, or piece of literature, because sometimes there's nothing more real to us than fiction. If you made it through all 3 hours of my yapping, I'm grateful. It took like 2.5 months just to write the script for this thing, and I'm so happy to finally see it all done. I know this video is very out of the ordinary compared to other stuff I've done, but if you've watched me for long enough now, you'll know that I just make whatever the hell I want. I've really wanted to do a video essay of this style for some time now. I've attempted to make one in the past, but it didn't quite work out. I'd still like to make that one though, but the script is going to need a total rewrite. I'm going to need a huge break after this one though, so don't expect that for a while. I don't want to drag out this outro for too long, so I'm just going to call it here. I really hope you enjoyed this one. It was really hard to make this last section here because my microphone has finally decided to shit out, so it's a miracle that I was even able to record this outro. Anyways, thanks for watching, and go ahead and leave any of your gaming experiences down in the comments. I'd love to read them. Peace out.